Welcome to MrDantello, a scary stories channel for peaceful nights. This video features long ghosts and haunted places stories meant to ease you into sleep. If you enjoy the stories, like, subscribe, and comment your location below. Get comfortable. Story 1. I went to a hotel and realized the front desk clerk had been dead longer than the building had been open. Rain hammered the roof of my 18-wheeler like 1,000 impatient fists. Fatigue was a physical weight behind my eyes, a thick syrup slowing my thoughts. I'd been driving since dawn, pushing through a brutal Midwest schedule, and the GPS had just rerouted me off the interstate after a massive accident blocked the main artery. Now, somewhere in the skeletal outskirts of a town called Mercy's End, Ohio, the fuel gauge dipped into the red, and my body screamed for horizontal rest. I spotted the sign through the downpour. The Everett Hotel, vacancy, weekly rates. It glowed a sickly, flickering yellow against the bruised twilight sky. The building itself was a low two-story concrete block, circa 1990s utilitarian architecture already streaked with grime and neglect. It looked less like a refuge and more like a tomb somebody forgot to seal properly, but it was shelter. It was dry. It was the only light for miles on this desolate stretch of Route 7. I killed the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the drumming rain. Grabbing my duffel and a small overnight bag, I shoved open the cab door and sprinted through the deluge towards the lobby entrance. The automatic door hissed open with a sound like a dying breath, releasing a wave of air that was several degrees warmer than outside, thick with the cloying scent of industrial lemon cleaner layered over something else, something faintly organic, like damp cardboard left too long in a basement. The lobby was small, dimly lit by a single, buzzing fluorescent panel over the reception desk. The carpet was a stained, industrial brown, patterned to hide a multitude of sins. A vending machine hummed tunelessly in one corner, its lights dead. The only other furniture was two cracked vinyl chairs facing a television bolted to the wall, screen dark. Behind the desk sat a man. He was maybe 60, dressed in a slightly too large polyester suit the color of dishwater. His thinning gray hair was combed meticulously over a liver-spotted scalp. He wore thick, horn-rimmed glasses that magnified eyes the color of stagnant pond water. He didn't look up as I approached, his gaze fixed on a heavy, leather-bound ledger open before him. His hands, resting atop the pages, were pale, almost translucent, the knuckles prominent and yellowed. He held a fountain pen, its nib hovering just above the paper. He hadn't moved, not a blink. Not a shift in his posture, not even the rise and fall of his chest was visible beneath the rumpled suit jacket. "Evening," I rasped, my voice rough from hours of silence and diesel fumes. The word felt too loud in the oppressive stillness. "Need a room? Single, just for the night." The clerk didn't react, not a flicker behind those magnified lenses. Not a twitch of his thin, colorless lips. He just stared at the ledger, the pen suspended, the silence stretched, thick and heavy. Rain lashed the plate glass window behind me. The hum of the vending machine seemed to grow louder, filling the vacuum. "Hello?" I tried again, louder, leaning slightly over the desk. "Room for the night?" Finally, his head lifted. It moved with a stiffness that seemed unnatural, like a rusted hinge. His eyes focused on me, but there was no life in them, no recognition. Just a flat, depthless stare that slid over my face without registering. His mouth opened. The movement was slow, deliberate, the jaw working with a faint, dry click. When he spoke, his voice was a papery whisper, devoid of inflection, as if replayed from a damaged tape. Room 201, second floor, end of hall. Each word was separated by a tiny pause, as if his vocal cords were reluctant machinery. He didn't smile. His face was utterly slack, waxy. The smell intensified as he moved. Beneath the sharp lemon cleaner, it was undeniable now. The sweet, cloying reek of decay. Not fresh, not pungent, but the dry, dusty scent of something that had been moldering for years, like old books left in a flooded cellar, like forgotten things in a sealed attic. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. Right, okay. How much? His head tilted a fraction of an inch. A strand of gray hair fell across his forehead. He didn't brush it away. 75, cash, or credit. He gestured slowly, stiffly, towards a slot on the desk where a credit card reader sat, its screen dark. His fingers, as they moved, looked brittle. The skin had a strange sheen, like old candle wax. And the smell, it was coming from him. It washed over the desk, cutting through the lemon scent. Cash is fine, I muttered, fumbling my wallet out of my jacket. My fingers felt clumsy. I counted out 4 20s, laying them carefully on the ledger beside his unmoving hand. He didn't acknowledge the money. His gaze had drifted back to the ledger, fixed on a spot on the page. His pen was still held aloft, unmoving. The silence returned, heavier than before. The rain outside sounded muffled, distant, as if the hotel existed in its own soundproofed bubble of wrongness. He didn't give me a key. He just stared at the ledger. I cleared my throat. The key? For 214? Slowly, with that same mechanical stiffness, he reached down beside the desk. His movement was jerky, lacking fluidity. He pulled up a large, old-fashioned key ring, the kind with heavy numbered brass keys. He selected one, 214, and placed it on the desk with deliberate care. His fingers brushed the metal, and I saw it then. A thick layer of dust coated the knuckles of his right hand. Not the fine dust of the room, but a settled, ingrained grime, like soil. His fingernails were yellowed and slightly curved, thickened with age, or something else. And the skin around its collar, it didn't quite meet the white shirt. There was a faint, uneven line, a discoloration, beneath the jawline where the suit jacket met his neck. A seam. My stomach lurched. I snatched the key, the cold metal biting into my palm. Thanks, I mumbled, turning away too quickly, desperate to escape that stare, that smell, that unnatural stillness. I practically ran for the stairs tucked beside the vending machine. The carpet muffled my footsteps. I didn't look back. Room 214 was at the end of a narrow, dimly lit hallway on the second floor. The carpet here was the same stained brown, but threadbare down the center. The air was colder, damper. I jammed the heavy key into the lock. It resisted, stiff with disuse, then gave with a gritty scrape. The door swung inward on reluctant hinges. The room was freezing. The single window overlooking the rain-lashed parking lot and the dark fields beyond was slightly ajar, letting in a chill draft. The bed was narrow, unmade, the sheets grayish and rumpled. A small dead television sat on a dresser. The bathroom door hung, slightly open, revealing cracked tiles and a stained sink. The smell of mildew was strong. I flipped the light switch. Nothing happened. Of course, I fumbled for the small flashlight on my keychain, clicking it on. The beam cut through the gloom, illuminating dust motes dancing in the cold air. Exhaustion warred with the rising tide of unease. I just needed to sleep. 6 hours. Then I'd be gone before dawn. I pushed the window shut against the rain and the wind, the latch stiff and rusted. I pulled the thin, scratchy blanket over the bedspread, trying to ignore the grime. I set my duffel by the door, my keys and wallet on top. The flashlight beam caught something on the nightstand. Not a Gideon Bible. A thick, leather-bound book, identical to the ledger downstairs. Curiosity, sharp and unwelcome, pricked through my fatigue. I picked it up. It was heavy, cold. I opened it. The pages were filled with cramped, spidery handwriting, names, dates, room numbers. But the dates, they stopped abruptly. The last entry was dated October 17th, 1978. The ink was faded, brownish. Below it, the page was blank, utterly blank. For over 40 years, my blood ran cold. The hotel sign outside had said, Esther, 1998. I'd seen the permit sticker on the lobby door, 1998. This ledger predated the building by 20 years. A floorboard creaked in the hallway outside my door. I froze, the ledger heavy in my hands. The creak wasn't the usual settling groan of an old building. It was deliberate, slow, heavy, like footsteps, moving past my door, stopping, silence, then the softest scrape of something being dragged slowly along the carpet. My breath hitched. I clicked off the flashlight, plunging the room into near-total darkness, broken only by the faint, rain-smeared glow from the streetlight outside the window. I crept to the door, pressing my ear against the cheap wood. Silence. Thick, waiting silence. Then a sound that froze my marrow. A dry, papery whisper, barely audible through the door, yet chillingly clear. It was the clerk's voice, but not directed at me. It was a low murmur, a recitation, filled with that same mechanical cadence. John Abernathy, room 103, paid weekly. Quiet man, liked the radio, left abruptly. November 3rd, 1978, no forwarding address. A pause. The dragging sound resumed, slow, deliberate. Martha and Robert Finch, room 207, honeymoon suite, stayed one night, never checked out, found belongings, December 12th, 1978. Another pause. The dragging stopped right outside my door. The whisper came again, lower, almost intimate, yet devoid of warmth. New guest, room 214, paid cash, 75 seems tired. I stumbled back from the door, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The ledger slipped from my numb fingers, hitting the carpet with a soft thud. The clerk wasn't just dead. He was recording the dead. He was the hotel's memory, its keeper. And he'd been dead longer than the concrete walls had stood. The smell in the lobby, it wasn't decay masked by cleaner. It was decay preserved by something else, something that kept him at his post. I needed to get out, now. Forget sleep, forget the rain, forget the truck. I grabbed my keys and wallet, shoving them into my pockets. I yanked the door open, flashlight beam cutting the hallway darkness. The hallway was empty. The carpet was undisturbed. But the smell was there, stronger. That dry, sweet rot cutting through the mildew. And on the carpet directly opposite my door, dragged in a straight line from the stairs, was a faint, dark trail, not water. Something thicker, something that glistened faintly in the beam of my light. Fluid. I followed the trail with my eyes. It led down the hall, around a corner towards the stairs, and at the very edge of the beam's reach, just before the corner, a single, heavy brass key lay on the carpet. Key number 214, the key I just used. The key he'd given me. He'd taken it back. He'd been here. While I was reading the ledger, while I was listening at the door, he'd stood right outside. He'd taken the key. Panic, pure and electric, surged through me. I ran down the hall, taking the stairs 2 at a time, my boots thudding on the hollow steps. I burst into the lobby. Empty. The fluorescent light still buzzed overhead. The ledger lay open on the desk. The 420s I'd paid were gone. The clerk's chair was empty. Relief, sharp and sudden, washed over me. He was gone. I could get my truck, drive through the night, put miles between me and this place. I turned towards the exit, my hand reaching for the door handle. It didn't budge. I yanked, pushed, rattled the handle, locked. From the outside, or something else, the automatic door mechanism was dead. The rain streaked the glass, turning the parking lot lights into watery smears. I was trapped. A dry chuckle echoed in the silent lobby. It came from behind the desk. Slowly, dread turning my limbs to lead, I turned. He was sitting in his chair again, exactly as before, hands on the ledger, pen hovering. His head was tilted at that same unnatural angle. The thick glasses reflected the buzzing fluorescent light, hiding his eyes. But his mouth was open in a rictus that wasn't a smile. It was too wide, too stiff. His lips were cracked grayish at the edges. The smell washed over me in a thick wave. Dust, formaldehyde, and the deep, sweet undertone of earth after a long burial, and the line beneath his jaw. In the harsh light, it was unmistakable. A seam, rough, slightly raised, like bad taxidermy. You're not open. I whispered the words, scraping my throat. This place, it wasn't here in 1978. The sign. His head turned, slowly, too slowly. The movement made a faint creak in the quiet. His magnified eyes fixed on me, unblinking. The pupils were tiny black dots in the milky irises. His jaw worked, the bones grinding audibly before the whisper emerged, dry as crumbling leaves. The Everett was always here. The bones, remember. He lifted one stiff hand, pointing a yellowed finger not at me, but past me, towards the dark window. They built on the old foundation, on the cellar, where I stayed. His voice dropped, becoming a rasping breath that seemed to come from the desk itself. The ledger must be kept. The guests accounted for. You paid. You are accounted for. He lowered his hand. It landed on the ledger with a soft thump. Not the sound of flesh on leather, the sound of wood on wood. His fingers curled around the edge of the book. With jerky, deliberate movements, he turned a page. Blank. He turned another. Blank. His pen, held in those stiff, waxy fingers, descended towards the pristine paper. The nib touched the page. No ink flowed, just a dry scratching sound. He began to write, slowly, painstakingly. The scratching filled the lobby. Louder than the rain, louder than my own ragged breathing. I couldn't move, couldn't look away. The pen moved across the blank page, forming letters with agonizing slowness. G-U-E-S-T, blank space, R-O-O-M, 214-D-A-T-E. Today's date, S-T-A-T-U-S, A-R-R-I-V-E-D. The pen stopped, hovered. Then, with deliberate pressure, it scratched 2 more words beneath the date, S-T-A-Y-I-N-G-P-E-R-M-A-N-E-N-T. He lifted his head. The magnified eyes locked onto mine. The too wide mouth didn't move, but the whisper filled my skull, dry and final, carrying the chill of deep earth and forgotten cellars. Check out is not required. The buzzing fluorescent light above the desk flickered violently, once, twice, then died, plunging the lobby into near darkness, lit only by the faint, rain-blurred glow from the streetlights outside the window. In that gloom, the shape behind the desk didn't move. It simply sat, waiting. The dry scratching of the pen on the blank page started again, slow and relentless in the suffocating dark. I backed away, my shoulder blades hitting the cold glass of the exit door. The scratching sound followed me, not growing louder, but seeming to seep into the very air, into my bones. It wasn't just sound, it was a promise, a ledger entry being made, my name, my room, my permanent status. The smell of dust and decay was inside my mouth. I closed my eyes, pressing my forehead against the cold glass, listening to the pen scratch my fate onto a page that had been blank for decades, waiting for me. The rain hammered on. The hotel held its breath, and the clerk, who had been dead since long before the first brick was laid, continued his eternal shift, recording the guest who would never leave. The scratching never stopped. It was the only sound left in the world. That brings this story to a close. Let's carry on to the next one. Someone keeps leaving wet footprints beside my bed on the second floor. The house stood alone on the cliff edge, a hulking silhouette of weathered gray shingles and sagging porches against the perpetually stormy sky of the Pacific Northwest. Seabreeze Cottage, the listing had called it, a name dripping with ironic cheerfulness. The photos showed a cozy, if rustic, two-bedroom perched dramatically above the churning gray waters of the Salish Sea. The price was shockingly low for the location. "Owner relocating urgently," the note said. Desperation, my own kind, fueled by a toxic breakup and the suffocating confines of my old city apartment, overruled the usual caution. My savings, bolstered by a small inheritance I've been saving for something better, felt like a shield. I could afford this isolation. I needed it to heal, to breathe, to forget. Mrs. Gable, the owner, met me on the rain-slicked gravel drive. She was a woman carved from the same gnarled wood as the driftwood littering the beach below, small, wiry, with eyes the color of the sea on a cloudy day, sharp and assessing. She handed me the keys without a word, her gaze fixed on the second-floor window above the porch. "Back door sticks," she rasped, her voice like stones grinding together. "Well, water's brackish. Use bottled for drinking. Don't go in the attic. Roof's unstable." She turned to leave, then paused, her eyes finally meeting mine. "And the beach. Stay off it after dark. The tide. It's hungry." Before I could ask what she meant, she was gone, her ancient pickup vanishing down the muddy track in a spray of gravel. The inside smelled of salt, damp wool, and wood smoke, a comforting, if slightly stale blend. The ground floor was functional, a small kitchen with a temperamental stove, a living room dominated by a stone fireplace blackened with soot, and a narrow staircase leading up. My bedroom was at the front, the one with the view of the endless, restless ocean. It was small, dominated by a heavy iron bedstead with a sagging mattress. The air was colder here, carrying the constant low roar of the surf. And the smell, beneath the salt and wood smoke, there was a faint, persistent tang of brine, like seaweed left to rot in the sun. I unpacked slowly, the crash of waves a constant rhythmic counterpoint to my thoughts. The silence, when the wind dropped, was profound, but it never felt empty. It felt occupied. The first morning, I woke to the weak gray light filtering through the thin curtains, and to the footprints. They were right beside the bed. On the worn, faded rug, not on the wooden floor, but clearly imprinted on the rug. Small, bare feet, and unmistakably wet. Not just damp, deeply saturated, leaving dark spreading stains on the pale fabric, the edges beaded with moisture that hadn't yet evaporated. The prints were close together, as if whoever made them had been standing very still, perhaps looking down at me while I slept. My heart slammed against my ribs. I scrambled out of bed, backing away. Impossible. The house was miles from any neighbor. Mrs. Gable was gone. The only entrance was the front and back doors downstairs, both locked from the inside. And this was the second floor. How? Raccoons? I'd heard them in the walls sometimes, but raccoons didn't leave distinct human-like footprints. And they certainly didn't climb 2 flights of stairs just to stand silently beside my bed and get the rug wet. I told myself it was a nightmare, a trick of the light on a damp rug. Maybe I'd tracked in seawater unknowingly. But I hadn't been to the beach. I hadn't even been outside except to carry in my bags. I spent the day cleaning the rug with towels, the damp patch stubbornly resistant, the smell of salt stronger in that spot. That night, I slept with the light on, every nerve ending prickling. I heard nothing but the wind and the waves. In the morning, the rug was dry, no footprints. Relief, warm and sweet, washed over me. Just stress, just your imagination running wild in this isolated place. It happened again 3 nights later. 3:17 a.m. I woke with a jolt, my skin prickling with the sudden intense feeling of being watched. The room was freezing, far colder than the usual chill. My breath plumed in the air, and there they were, fresh, darker this time. The wetness hadn't just stained the rug, it had soaked through, leaving damp patches on the wooden floor beneath. And the prints? They were closer to the bed, almost touching the edge of the mattress. I could see the distinct outline of the ball of the foot, the heel, the 5 separate toes. Small? Child-sized? The salt smell was overpowering, mixed now with the sharp, clean scent of ozone like after a lightning strike. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I just stared at those impossible wet marks on the rug, feeling the icy dread seep into my bones. They weren't just there. They felt deliberate, as if whoever left them wanted me to see them, wanted me to know they'd been standing there watching me sleep. I called Mrs. Gable the next day. The number was disconnected. I drove to the P.O. box listed on the lease. Empty. Panic, cold and slick, started to coil in my gut. I was truly alone here, with whatever was leaving those footprints. I started checking the house obsessively, locking the interior door at the bottom of the stairs at night, placing flour on the landing to catch tracks. Nothing. The flour remained undisturbed. The footprints only appeared beside my bed, on the rug, always after I'd been asleep for hours. The cold spots always preceded them, a sudden, localized drop in temperature that made my teeth chatter, centered right beside the bed. And the sound, sometimes just before I woke, I'd hear it, not footsteps, a soft, rhythmic drip, 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 like water falling from a wet sleeve onto the floor. But there was never any water on the floor, only the prints on the rug. Research became my obsession. Between staring out at the churning sea and trying to write, my notebook remained mostly blank, I scoured the local library's microfiche. Seabreeze Cottage, built 1890s, owned by the Henderson family for generations. Fishing family, tragedy, 1921. Newspaper headline, "Local fisher boy, 8, swept away during storm." The article was brief, grim. Young Thomas Henderson had been playing on the rocks below the cottage when a rogue wave, larger than the others, had snatched him from the shore. They never found the body. The cottage stood empty for years after that, the article noted, before being sold. My blood ran cold. Thomas Henderson, 8 years old, swept out to sea, and the footprints, they were small, child-sized. The salt smell, the drip of seawater, the cold that felt like the deep ocean, Mrs. Gable's warning, "The tide, it's hungry." That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the armchair by the window, a heavy blanket around my shoulders, a flashlight and a kitchen knife on the small table beside me, my eyes fixed on the patch of rug beside the bed. The storm outside intensified, rain lashing the windows, wind howling around the eaves like a banshee. The roar of the surf was deafening, a hungry pounding rhythm that vibrated through the floorboards. The cold came around 2:30 a.m., not gradual, a sudden bone-deep chill that made the blanket feel like tissue paper. My breath fogged thickly. I gripped the knife handle, my knuckles white. Plink! A single drop of water hit the rug beside the bed, dark spot blooming instantly. Plink! Another. Closer. The air grew thicker, heavier, saturated with the smell of the sea, not just salt, but the deep, cold, mineral smell of the open ocean, mixed with the rotting sweetness of kelp and the sharp tang of brine. The temperature plummeted further. My teeth chattered uncontrollably. I shone the flashlight towards the spot. Nothing, just the darkening wet patch on the rug. Then I saw it, not a shape, a displacement. The air above the wet spot shimmered like heat haze off asphalt, but cold, and within that shimmer 2 small bare feet materialized, hovering just above the rug dripping dark water. They weren't solid, not exactly, more like dense fog given form, constantly dripping, the water sizzling faintly as it hit the rug, leaving the dark, spreading stains. The feet turned slowly, as if the unseen presence was looking towards me in the chair. The dripping intensified. Plink, plink, plink. A voice, not a sound in the room. It came from inside my own head, thin and watery, echoing with the hollow emptiness of deep water. "Cold," it gurgled, the word thick with swallowed seawater. "So cold down there. Bring me back." Terror, pure and icy, locked my muscles. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, could barely breathe. The shimmering feet took a step forward, leaving a fresh, dark imprint on the rug. Another step. Closer to the bed, closer to me. The cold intensified, a physical pressure on my chest. The voice came again, more urgent, more desperate. "Warmth. Need warmth. You have warmth." I squeezed my eyes shut, tears freezing on my cheeks. "It's not real. It's the storm. It's grief. It's your mind." But the cold was real. The smell was real. The wet spot on the rug was spreading under the invisible feet. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the storm's roar and the gurgling voice. A sharp, insistent crack, like old wood splitting under immense pressure. It came from the attic, directly above my bedroom. Mrs. Gable's warning echoed, "Roof's unstable." But this didn't sound like the roof. It sounded like something inside. The attic was straining against the floorboards. The dripping stopped. The intense cold receded slightly, like a tide pulling back. The shimmering feet flickered, then vanished. The voice inside my head whispered, filled with sudden terror, "He's awake! He's coming down!" Then silence. The storm raged on, but the unnatural cold in the room lessened. Dawn came, gray and dripping. The wet footprints on the rug were still there, dark and accusing, and the patch of floor beneath them was colder to the touch than any other spot in the house. I avoided the attic. I avoided the stairs leading to it. I spent days jumping at every creak, every groan of the old house. The footprints came less frequently, but the cold spots remained, always strongest near the bed, always accompanied by that faint, watery gurgle if I stayed still long enough. The presence felt wary, waiting, watching from the deep. One rain-lashed afternoon, desperate for something, anything to break the tension, I pried open the trapdoor to the attic. Dust motes danced in the weak light from the single, grimy dormer window. The air was thick with the smell of dry rot and mouse droppings. It was mostly empty, cobwebbed rafters, a few broken crates. But in the far corner, tucked under the eaves, was a small child's rocking horse. Its paint was peeling, one glass eye missing, the remaining one staring blankly into the gloom, and draped over its saddle was a small sodden sailor's cap. The blue wool dark with salt and age, Thomas Henderson's cap. The air in the attic grew instantly cold, the smell of the sea flooding in, overpowering the dust. I scrambled back down, slamming the trapdoor shut, my heart in my throat. That night, the footprints didn't just appear beside the bed. They were everywhere, leading from the top of the stairs to the bed, circling the bed, leading to the window and back. Small, frantic, overlapping wet prints covering the entire rug, soaking deep into the floorboards. The cold was a physical force, making the iron bed frame feel like ice. The dripping was constant. Plink, 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 plink. A frantic rhythm. And the voice was no longer a whisper. It was a chorus of wet, gurgling pleas, overlapping, desperate. Cold. Bring me back. He's coming. Need warmth. Don't let him take me back to the wet dark. I huddled under the blankets, the knife clutched in my hand, tears streaming down my face. The storm outside reached a fever pitch, the wind screaming like a thing in agony. And then, from the attic, came the sound again. Not a crack this time, a slow, heavy drag, like something wet and immensely heavy being pulled across the floorboards. Scrape, drip, scrape, drip, moving towards the attic stairs. The dripping beside the bed stopped abruptly. The wet footprints seemed to shrink back, as if recoiling. The gurgling pleas turned to a single, high-pitched whimper of pure terror. He's here. The trapdoor at the top of the stairs rattled violently, not from the wind, from the other side. Something was trying to push it open. The heavy bolt I'd added myself held, but the wood groaned in protest. Rain lashed the windows, the storm raged, and from the other side of the bolted trapdoor, a new sound emerged, deep, guttural, wet, like stones grinding together under fathoms of water, a sound of immense age and bottomless hunger. It wasn't a voice. It was the sound of the deep ocean itself, given a terrible, grinding voice. It vibrated through the floorboards, shaking the bed. The cold in the room became absolute, stealing the breath from my lungs, frosting the inside of the windows. The wet footprints on the rug began to fade, not drying, but dissolving, as if being sucked back into the fabric of the house. The last thing I saw before I squeezed my eyes shut, praying for dawn, was the dark stain on the rug beside the bed, slowly forming into the shape of a small, outstretched hand, fingers grasping at the air, before vanishing entirely. I left at first light. I didn't pack. I just ran. I drove until the ocean was a distant memory, checked into a sterile, brightly lit hotel room with thick walls and the constant hum of traffic. I felt safe, warm. The salt smell was gone. For 2 nights, I slept deeply, dreamlessly. Last night, I woke to the sound of dripping, slow, rhythmic, plink, plink, plink. My blood turned to ice. I didn't want to look, but I had to. Slowly, I turned my head toward the floor beside the hotel bed. There, on the clean beige industrial carpet, were 3 perfect tiny bare footprints, dark, wet, leading from under the bed, and the air around them was frigid, carrying the faint, unmistakable tang of deep salt water and rotting kelp. On the nightstand, my phone lit up with a notification, not from a person, from a local news alert. Coastal alert, unusually high tide, expected tonight in Seabreeze area, residents urged to avoid beaches. The dripping continued. Plink, plink, plink. Closer to the bed now, the cold was spreading, and from the darkness under the hotel bed, a thin, watery voice gurgled inside my skull, filled with a terror that mirrored my own. He followed me. He followed me through the wet. He's hungry for warmth. He's coming up. The hotel room door handle began to turn, slowly, deliberately. The lock clicked open. The door creaked inward, revealing only the dimly lit hallway. But the smell of the deep ocean flooded the room, and the dripping sound was no longer just beside the bed. It was coming from the hallway, wet, heavy footsteps, slow, dragging, getting closer. The hunger of the tide doesn't stay at the shore. It follows the lost. And it always, always finds its way back to the warmth. That's where this story ends. Let's continue with the next. Every guest who stayed in room 217 checked out with one more suitcase than they arrived with. I took the job at the Blackwood Hotel out of sheer desperation. It wasn't the kind of place you applied to with ambition in your heart. It was the kind of place you stumbled into after 3 months of rejection emails and dwindling savings, when the prospect of folding towels and changing sheets for minimum wage plus tips felt like salvation. The Blackwood stood on the edge of downtown, a hulking brick relic from the 1920s that had never quite managed to transition from grandeur to boutique charm. Its glory days were sepia-toned photographs in the lobby, women in flapper dresses laughing on the marble staircase, men in sharp suits tipping their hats to bellhops. Now the carpets were threadbare in the high traffic areas, the brass fixtures tarnished to a dull brown, and the air carried a permanent scent of lemon-scented disinfectant trying and failing to mask the underlying odor of mildew and old wood. Mr. Albright, the manager, was a man carved from the same weary material as the hotel itself. Thin, stooped, with eyes that had seen too many checkouts and not enough genuine goodbyes. He showed me the ropes on my first day, how to mix the industrial strength cleaner just right, which rooms had temperamental locks, where the spare linens were kept. He spoke in a low, measured monotone, as if conserving energy was a survival skill. When we reached the 3rd floor, he paused outside room 314, his key card hovering over the reader. "There's one rule," he said, not looking at me. "One absolute rule you do not break. Room 217 is on the 2nd floor at the end of the east wing. You will clean every room on your list except that one. Room 217 cleans itself." I almost laughed. It was such an obvious, tired ghost story, the kind every old hotel uses to spook new staff. Cleans itself? I repeated, trying to keep the skepticism from my voice. Albright finally turned his head and looked at me. His eyes weren't playful. They were flat, exhausted, and utterly serious. The door will be locked when you arrive each morning. When you return at the end of your shift, it will still be locked. But if you look through the peephole, which I do not recommend, you will see that the bed is made, the towels are fresh, the trash can is empty. It happens between the hours of 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. No one goes in. No one comes out. The previous housekeeper, a woman named Lena, who worked here 20 years, insisted on cleaning it herself once. She lasted 3 days before she quit without collecting her final paycheck. She left her own suitcase in room 217. Took a different one with her when she walked out the front door, a larger one. He swiped a key card. The lock clicked. He pushed the door open to 314. Just stay off the east wing after 10 a.m., stick to your list, and never, ever accept a tip from a guest staying in 217. They'll try to give you one. Always in cash. Always exact change for $100 bill in ones. Don't take it. Don't even look at it. Just say thank you and leave. I nodded, humoring him. Old buildings have quirks. Superstitious managers have rules. I figured 217 was probably just a room reserved for the owner or used for storage, and Albright used the spooky story to keep curious staff away. I didn't believe in ghosts. I believed in leaky pipes, faulty wiring, and the human tendency to invent narratives to explain the mundane. For 2 weeks, I followed the rules. I avoided the east wing after 10. I cleaned my assigned rooms efficiently, learning the rhythms of the place. The Blackwood wasn't empty. Far from it. It had a steady stream of guests, traveling salesmen passing through on their way to nowhere important, elderly couples on fixed incomes who remembered when the hotel was still fashionable, the occasional musician playing at the dive bar down the street. They were quiet mostly, transient, unmemorable. Then came the Tuesday when Mrs. Gable called in sick. Mrs. Gable was the day shift housekeeper, a stout woman in her 60s with iron-gray hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. She'd been at the Blackwood longer than Albright. She never spoke of room 217. She just never went down that hall. When Albright told me I'd have to cover her route that day, my stomach tightened. I'd have to pass 217. I might even have to clean it if a guest had checked out. "Don't worry," Albright said, his voice devoid of reassurance. "No one's checked out of 217. Guest is still in residence. Just do the other rooms on the east wing. Leave 217 alone. Knock once at 11 to offer turn-down service. If they don't answer, leave the chocolates on the floor outside the door and walk away. Don't wait. Don't listen." I spent the morning cleaning rooms on the west wing, my anxiety building with each passing hour. At 10:45, I stood at the entrance to the east wing, my cart laden with fresh towels and miniature shampoo bottles. The hallway here was different, narrower. The carpet pattern was the same, but it seemed to absorb sound more completely. The air was cooler. I pushed my cart forward, the squeaky wheels suddenly silent, as if the hallway itself was swallowing noise. I cleaned 212, 214, 216. Each room felt normal enough, though a subtle unease settled over me the closer I got to the end of the hall. At 216, as I was wiping down the bathroom sink, I heard it, a soft, rhythmic thumping from the other side of the shared wall. Thump, pause, thump, pause, like something heavy being gently set down on the floor, over and over. I pressed my ear against the wall. The sound stopped immediately. I waited a full minute. Nothing. I finished the room quickly and backed out into the hall. Room 217 loomed at the end. The door was identical to all the others: dark wood, brass number plate, electronic lock. But it felt different. The air around it seemed denser, charged with a stillness that wasn't peaceful but watchful. I glanced at my watch. 10:58. I had 2 minutes before I was supposed to knock. I busied myself restocking my cart, my hands trembling slightly. At 11 a.m. exactly, I walked to the door, my knuckles rapped against the wood. 3 sharp professional taps. Housekeeping. Turn down service. Silence. Not ordinary silence of an empty room or a sleeping guest. This was an active silence, a presence holding its breath. I waited the required 10 seconds. Nothing. I bent down, placed the 2 foil-wrapped chocolates on the carpet directly in front of the door, and stood up. As I turned to leave, my eyes caught something at the base of the door. Not a shadow, a seam of darkness that shouldn't have been there. The door wasn't fully closed, just a hair's breadth, less than a millimeter, but enough that the light from the hallway didn't bleed underneath it evenly. One side was perfectly dark. The other had the faintest sliver of illumination. My heart hammered against my ribs. Albright's warning echoed in my mind. Don't listen. I should have walked away. But I was young, and curiosity has always been my fatal flaw. I leaned closer, my ear inches from the gap. At first, nothing. Then a sound so faint I thought I imagined it. The soft rustle of fabric, not the crisp sound of bedsheets being changed. This was heavier. Wool, maybe, or thick canvas. And beneath it, a whisper so low it was almost subaudible, a sibilant hiss that formed no words but carried an unmistakable tone of anticipation. I jerked back as if burned. I didn't run. I forced myself to walk at a normal pace back to my cart, my legs weak. I finished the rest of the east wing in a daze, jumping at every creak of the old building. When I returned to the lobby at 1 p.m. to take my lunch break, Albright was waiting for me behind the front desk, his arms crossed. "You knocked on 217, he stated. It wasn't a question. I nodded, unable to speak. "Did you hear anything?" I hesitated, then nodded again. His face didn't change, but his shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly. "What did you hear?" "The door wasn't quite closed," I whispered. "I heard rustling, like fabric, and whispering." Albright closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, they held a pity I hadn't seen before. "You shouldn't have listened, but you're still here. That's something. Just be careful tonight. Your shift ends at 10. Leave immediately. Don't linger in the lobby. Don't take the elevator alone after 9. I spent the afternoon cleaning the 4th floor, my mind churning. During my break, I did something I should have done weeks ago. I went to the front desk when Albright was in his office and accessed the hotel's internal guest ledger on the old terminal. It was against policy, but fear overrides policy. I typed in 217. The record was sparse. Guest name, Alistair Finch. Check-in date, March 14th, 1987. Expected stay, 1 night. Current status, in residence. My blood ran cold. March 14th, 1987, 39 years ago. I scrolled down, my fingers numb. There were no checkout dates, no notes about extending the stay, just a single line at the bottom of the digital record, added manually in 2003 according to the timestamp. Guest prefers extended stay. Billing handled internally. Do not disturb. I logged out quickly, my pulse roaring in my ears. A guest who had been in residence for nearly 4 decades. It was impossible. A clerical error, surely, a placeholder record for a room kept permanently reserved. But Albright's warning, Mrs. Gable's departure, the self-cleaning room, it all clicked into a horrifying pattern. Room 217 wasn't just haunted, it was occupied. Permanently. That evening, as dusk settled over the city, I found myself drawn back to the east wing during my final rounds. I told myself I was just checking that all the other rooms were properly secured for the night. But I knew the truth. I needed to see, just once. I needed to understand what was happening in that room. I waited until 9:45, when the night auditor had stepped into the back office for his coffee break. The lobby was empty. I took the service stairs to the second floor, my footsteps echoing in the concrete well. The east wing was darker now, the single wall sconce halfway down flickering intermittently. I moved silently, my cart left behind. I stopped 20 feet from room 217 and simply watched the door. For 10 minutes, nothing. Then, at 9:57 p.m., I heard it. A soft click from within the room. The electronic lock disengaging. The door swung inward slowly, silently, opening about 6 inches. No one stood there. No hand was visible. The gap revealed only darkness beyond the threshold. I held my breath, pressing myself against the wall across the hall, hidden in shadow. From the darkness within the room, something emerged. Not a person. A suitcase? An old-fashioned leather suitcase, worn at the corners, brass fittings tarnished green with age. It slid smoothly across the threshold, stopping just outside the door on the hallway carpet. It sat there for a full minute, perfectly still. Then, from inside the room, a hand appeared in the doorway. Pale, slender, the fingers long and delicate. It wasn't a threatening hand. It was almost gentle. The fingers curled around the suitcase's handle, gave it a soft tug back across the threshold, and disappeared. The door began to swing shut. But it didn't close all the way. It stopped at that same hair's breadth gap I'd noticed that morning, and through that sliver of darkness I saw it, just for a second. A figure standing in the center of the room, back to the door, tall, thin, wearing what looked like a suit from another era, and beside it, on the neatly made bed, sat 2 suitcases. One was the old leather one I'd just seen. The other was newer, a black nylon roller bag I recognized instantly. It was mine. I'd unpacked it that morning, in my studio apartment across town. I knew the scuff on the corner, the broken zipper pull on the front pocket. There was no mistaking it. The figure didn't turn. It simply stood there, motionless, as if aware of my presence but indifferent to it. Then, slowly, it raised one hand, not toward me, but toward the space beside it on the bed. An invitation, an offer. I ran. I didn't look back. I took the stairs 2 at a time, burst into the lobby, and didn't stop until I was 3 blocks away, leaning against a brick wall, gasping for air. I didn't go back to the Blackwood that night. I called in sick the next day. And the day after that, I told myself I was quitting. I would find another job. Any job. But rent was due, and my savings were gone. And after 4 days of panic and sleepless nights, a strange thing happened. The memory began to soften at the edges. The image of my own suitcase on that bed became less a horror and more a curiosity. Had I really seen it? Or had exhaustion and suggestion created a waking nightmare? Hotels have identical luggage. It must have been a coincidence. A trick of the light. I went back to work on Monday. Albright said nothing about my absence. He just handed me my key card and my room list. I avoided the East Wing all morning, but during my lunch break, sitting alone in the staff break room, I found myself thinking about it. Not with fear anymore, but with a gnawing, insistent curiosity. What was in that room? What did it want? And why my suitcase? The question looped in my mind until it lost its terror and became a puzzle, a challenge. That afternoon, a deliveryman arrived with a package for room 217, a small flat cardboard box, no return address. Albright was dealing with an irate guest at the front desk. The delivery man, impatient, thrust the package at me. "You work here? Take it to 217. Sign here." I should have refused. I should have called for Albright. But the puzzle had me in its grip. I signed the digital pad with a trembling finger and took the package. It was light, almost weightless. I stood there in the lobby, the box in my hands, and made a decision that would unravel the rest of my life. I would deliver it. I would see the guest. I would look this thing in the face and prove to myself it was just a man, just a reclusive eccentric who had lived in a hotel room for decades. I would break the spell with simple, mundane reality. I took the elevator to the second floor. My palms were slick with sweat. The hallway to the East Wing had never felt longer. I stopped outside 217, the package held tightly against my chest. I raised my hand to knock, but before my knuckles could touch the wood, the lock clicked, the door swung inward 6 inches, the same as last time. An invitation. My breath caught. I could still turn back. I could drop the package and run. But I didn't. I pushed the door open the rest of the way and stepped inside. The room was immaculate, not just clean, perfect. The bed was made with hospital corners so tight you could bounce a coin off the duvet. The desk was bare except for a single unlit candle in a brass holder. The air was cool and carried a faint scent of sandalwood and old paper. And there, standing by the window overlooking the alley, was the figure I'd seen through the crack in the door. He turned as I entered. He was tall and gaunt, dressed in a charcoal gray suit that might have been fashionable in the 1940s. His face was pale, almost translucent, with deep-set eyes the color of faded denim. He wasn't monstrous. He wasn't decaying. He looked tired, profoundly, eternally tired and sad. "You shouldn't be here while awake," he said. His voice was soft, cultured, with an accent I couldn't place. "The threshold is fragile. Consciousness weighs too heavily on it." I held out the package, my arm trembling. "Delivery?" A faint smile touched his lips. Not a happy smile, a resigned one. "Ah, yes, the monthly reminder." He took the box from my hands without touching my fingers. He didn't open it. He simply placed it on the desk beside the candle. "You saw your suitcase," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, unable to speak. "It's not a threat," he said, turning back to the window. It's an offer, a replacement. Everyone who stays here carries baggage. Not the kind that fits in luggage. The other kind, regrets, guilt, memories that have calcified into weights around the soul. Room 217 absorbs them. It takes the heaviest piece of you and gives you back an empty vessel. A fresh start. The new suitcase is always lighter than the one you arrived with. Isn't that what everyone wants? To be unburdened? I thought of my own baggage, the failed relationship that still woke me at 3 a.m., the career path abandoned in shame, the constant low-grade anxiety that had been my companion since adolescence. The weight of it all pressed down on me in that moment, so tangible I could barely stand upright. "What's in my suitcase?" I whispered. He turned and looked at me, his faded eyes holding mine. "Nothing, and everything. It contains the shape of what you left behind. The ghost of your burden. It's not dangerous. It's just empty, waiting to be filled again. Eventually, everyone fills it again. That's why they check out. They can't bear the lightness for long. They miss the weight. It's familiar. It's theirs." He gestured to the 2 suitcases on the bed. The old leather one, my black nylon bag. The first guest stayed for 73 years. He arrived with a single valise containing his entire life after his family perished in a fire. He left with 12 steamer trunks, each heavier than the last. He couldn't stop collecting weight. The second guest stayed 3 nights. She arrived with 2 suitcases full of her husband's debts and infidelities. She left with 1 small clutch purse. She never looked back. I have been here since 1943. I arrived with 1 suitcase. I have been waiting for it to feel light enough to leave behind. It never does. The room only takes what you're willing to surrender, and I cannot surrender the last piece. "What's the last piece?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "My name," he said softly. "Without it, who would I be? The room cannot take what I will not release, so I remain, and the suitcases accumulate." He gestured around the room. Only then did I notice them, stacked neatly in the corners under the bed, lining the closet that stood slightly ajar. Dozens of suitcases, hundreds, different eras, different styles, all impeccably maintained. A silent museum of surrendered sorrows. "You can leave now," he said, his gaze returning to the window. "Before the threshold solidifies with your presence, go while you still can." But I didn't move. The weight on my own shoulders felt suddenly unbearable. The thought of walking back into my life, carrying all of it, the shame, the fear, the endless cycle of anxiety, made my chest constrict. What would it feel like to be free of it, just for a night, just to see what lightness felt like? I think I'd like to stay," I heard myself say. The man by the window went very still. He didn't turn. "You don't mean that." "I do," I insisted, the words gaining strength. "Just one night, to see what it's like, to see if I could let go." Slowly he turned. His expression had changed. The sadness was still there, but beneath it was something else. Pity, yes, but also a flicker of hunger, a longing so deep it was almost physical. "One night," he repeated. "You understand the terms? You will sleep in this bed. When you wake, there will be 1 more suitcase than when you arrived. You may take it with you, or you may leave it here. The choice is always yours." "I understand." He nodded once, a sharp, final motion. He walked to the door and opened it. "I will take the hallway. You may have the room. Sleep well." He stepped out, pulling the door shut behind him. I heard the lock engage. I was alone. The room was silent. Too silent. No hum of traffic from the street, no groan of pipes, no whisper of wind. Just a profound velvety quiet that seemed to press against my eardrums. I sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress was firm, the linens cool against my skin. I lay back, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. I expected fear. I expected to lie awake all night. But exhaustion claimed me almost immediately, a deep, unnatural drowsiness that pulled me under like a riptide. I dreamed of unpacking, not in this room, but in my childhood home. I was emptying a suitcase onto my old bed, pulling out objects that represented every failure, every regret, every moment of shame I had ever experienced. A crumpled rejection letter from my dream college, a photograph of my ex-partner with someone new, a hospital bracelet from the night my mother died, a report card with a failing grade circled in red. Each item heavier than the last. I placed them carefully on the bedspread, my hands trembling with the effort, and with each object I removed, I felt lighter, airier. By the time the suitcase was empty, I was floating above the bed, weightless, free. I looked down at my body lying there, peaceful for the first time in memory, and I saw the suitcase beside it, not empty, but full again, packed neatly with all the things I had just released. But they were different now, diminished, shadows of their former selves. I woke with the first gray light of dawn filtering through the window. I was still in room 217. I was lying on top of the covers, exactly as I had fallen asleep. And on the floor beside the bed, where there had been only 2 suitcases the night before, now sat 3. My black nylon roller bag, the old leather suitcase, and between them a third, smaller, a vintage leather overnight case in deep burgundy, the kind my grandmother might have used for weekend trips. It looked expensive, well cared for, and utterly alien to me. I sat up slowly, my body feeling strange, light, yes, but not in a pleasant way. It was a hollow lightness, as if parts of me had been carved away during the night, leaving cavities where substance used to be. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and knelt before the burgundy suitcase. My hand shook as I unclasped the brass latches. The lid lifted silently. Inside, nestled in cream-colored satin, lay objects. Not my objects. A child's hair ribbon, faded blue. A tarnished silver locket containing a miniature photograph of a woman I didn't recognize. A dried sprig of lavender tied with thread. A letter written in elegant cursive on yellowed paper, the ink faded to brown. A small, smooth river stone. Each item radiated a profound sense of loss. Not my loss, someone else's. A grief I had never felt, yet somehow now carried within me. I snapped the suitcase shut, my breath coming in short gasps. This wasn't freedom, this was theft. The room hadn't taken my burdens, it had replaced them with another's. I had surrendered my own pain only to inherit a stranger's sorrow. I stumbled to the door and yanked it open. The hallway was empty. I grabbed my original suitcase and the new burgundy case and fled the room, not looking back. At the front desk, Albright was waiting. He took one look at my face, at the 2 suitcases in my hands, and his expression hardened into something like grief. "You stayed," he said quietly. I could only nod, tears streaming down my face. He reached under the counter and placed a small envelope on the desk. "Your final paycheck, plus a bonus, for inconvenience," he wouldn't meet my eyes. Don't come back. And whatever you do, don't open that second suitcase again. Don't look at what's inside. Just take it home, put it in a closet, leave it there. The weight will fade with time. It always does. I took the envelope and walked out of the Blackwood Hotel for the last time. I didn't look back. I went home to my studio apartment and did exactly as Albright instructed. I placed the burgundy suitcase in the back of my closet, behind winter coats I never wore. I tried to forget it was there. For 3 days, I felt lighter. The anxiety that had plagued me for years was gone. The memories that usually haunted my quiet moments were distant, muffled. I slept deeply. I ate without dread. I almost convinced myself it had been worth it. On the 4th night, I woke at 2:17 a.m. to the sound of soft weeping. It wasn't coming from the apartment next door. It was coming from my closet. A woman's voice, broken with a grief so ancient and absolute, it froze the blood in my veins. I lay in bed, paralyzed, listening as the weeping slowly subsided, replaced by a single whispered phrase that seeped through the closet door and wrapped itself around my heart. I never got to say goodbye. I knew then what I had taken, not a burden, a soul, a fragment of someone who had stayed in room 217 long ago and surrendered too much, and the room, in its hunger, had given me their echo to carry. I still have the suitcase. I've moved 3 times since that night, and each time I pack it carefully, placing it in the deepest corner of whatever closet I inhabit. I've never opened it again, but sometimes in the deepest part of the night I hear the faint rustle of fabric from within it, and I know that room 217 isn't haunted by ghosts. It is a ghost itself, a hungry, ancient thing that feeds on sorrow and pays its guests in borrowed grief. And I understand now why every guest checks out with one more suitcase than they arrived with. They aren't carrying their own pain anymore. They're carrying someone else's. And the terrible truth no one speaks aloud is this: the new suitcase is always heavier than the one you left behind, because someone else's sorrow has no context, no history to soften its edges. It is pure, undiluted loss, and it waits patiently in the darkness of your closet for the moment you forget to be afraid and unzip the case just one more time. And that's where this story ends. Let's move on to the next one. The Old Mill House and the Shadow that Follows You Home. The road to Blackwood Creek had not been paved in decades, a fact that became painfully apparent as my sedan bounced over the jagged ruts, the suspension groaning in protest with every impact. The map on my phone had lost signal 20 miles back, leaving me navigating by nothing more than a hand-drawn sketch I'd found taped to the inside of a gas station restroom door. The sketch was crude, drawn in what looked like charcoal, depicting a winding path through a dense thicket of pines that seemed to lean inward, their branches interlocking to form a suffocating tunnel of green and gray. At the end of the path, marked with a heavy, aggressive X, was a simple rectangle labeled Mill House. The note beneath it read, "Caretaker needed. Solitude guaranteed. Rent-free. Do not stay after dark if you value your shadow." I had laughed when I first read it, a nervous, brittle sound in the quiet car, a joke. Local color, meant to scare off tourists or pranksters. I wasn't a tourist, and I certainly wasn't easily scared. I was a man running from the noise of a life that had become too loud, too bright, too crowded. I needed silence. I needed a place where the world couldn't find me. If a creepy warning on a bathroom wall was the price of admission, I was willing to pay it. The trees grew thicker as I drove deeper into the valley, the sunlight filtering through the canopy in dappled, shifting patches that looked more like bruises than illumination. The air inside the car felt stale, despite the vents blowing full blast. It smelled of damp earth and something else, something metallic like old copper or dried blood. When the trees finally parted, revealing the clearing, the sight of the mill house stopped me cold. It was not the quaint rustic cottage I had imagined. It was a monstrosity of rotting timber and crumbling stone, perched precariously on the edge of a stagnant creek that flowed with water so black it looked like oil. The mill wheel, massive and skeletal, hung half submerged in the muck, its paddles broken and jagged like the teeth of a starving beast. The house itself leaned heavily to the left, as if trying to escape its own foundation, the siding peeling away in long gray strips that fluttered in the wind like dead skin. There were no windows on the ground floor, only boarded-up gaps that stared out like blinded eyes. The second story had windows, but the glass was so clouded with grime that they reflected nothing but the oppressive sky. I killed the engine, the sudden silence rushing in to fill the void left by the motor's hum. It was a heavy silence, thick and expectant, pressing against the glass. I stepped out of the car, my boots sinking into the mud that coated the driveway. The air was colder here, biting through my jacket, carrying the scent of mildew and stagnant water. I walked up the porch steps, which groaned under my weight, a low protesting sound that echoed through the empty valley. The front door was heavy oak, scarred with deep gouges that looked suspiciously like claw marks. There was no handle, only a heavy iron ring. I pulled it, and the door swung inward with a shriek of rusted hinges. Inside, the darkness was absolute. I fumbled for my flashlight, the beam cutting a shaky path through the gloom. The foyer was vast, dominated by a staircase that swept upward into the shadows. Dust motes danced in the light, swirling in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. The air smelled of lavender and rot, a cloying combination that made my stomach turn. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding thin and fragile in the vast space. There was no answer, no creak of floorboards, no scurry of mice, just the silence. I explored the ground floor, finding the kitchen stocked with canned goods that dated back years, the labels faded and peeling. The living room was furnished with heavy draped furniture that looked like it hadn't been sat in for 50 years. A fireplace dominated one wall, filled with cold ash and blackened logs. Everything was covered in a fine layer of gray dust, except for the floor in the center of the hallway. There, the dust had been disturbed, swept away in a perfect narrow trail that led from the front door to the staircase. It looked as if someone, or something, had dragged a heavy object up the stairs recently, or perhaps something had walked there, wiping its feet with unnatural precision. I frowned, dismissing it as the work of the previous caretaker, or maybe animals. Rats could be large in places like this. I climbed the stairs, the wood groaning under my weight. The hallway upstairs was narrower, lined with framed photographs that were so dark I couldn't make out the subjects. My room was at the end of the hall, a sparse space containing an iron frame bed, a wooden dresser, and a small desk by the window. The window looked out over the creek, where the black water churned silently beneath the broken mill wheel. I dropped my bags and immediately set about making the space habitable. I aired out the blankets, wiped down the surfaces, and set up my laptop. As I worked, the silence of the house continued to press in on me. But beneath it, I began to notice something else, a sensation, a feeling of being watched, not by a person, but by the darkness itself. I turned around frequently, expecting to see someone standing in the doorway, but the hall was always empty. Yet the feeling persisted, a prickling on the back of my neck that refused to fade. Night fell quickly, swallowing the house in darkness. I lit a few candles I had brought, placing them strategically around the room to push back the shadows. The flickering light made the room dance, creating illusions of movement in the corners of my eyes. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to read a book, but my eyes kept drifting to the floor. That's when I saw it, my shadow. It was cast against the wall by the candlelight, elongated and distorted. But it wasn't mimicking me. I was sitting still, holding the book open. My shadow was standing. It was upright, its arms hanging loosely at its sides, its head tilted slightly to the side as if examining me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I blinked, sure my eyes were playing tricks on me. I moved my hand slowly. The shadow on the wall didn't move. It remained standing, perfectly still, watching me. A cold sweat broke out across my skin. I stood up abruptly, knocking the book to the floor. "Okay," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Light trick. Just a light trick." I waved my hand in front of the candle. The shadow on the wall finally moved, but it didn't wave back. It stepped forward, detaching itself from the wall and sliding across the floor toward me. I scrambled backward, hitting the bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. The shadow was no longer attached to anything. It was a pool of pure darkness, two-dimensional, yet possessing a terrifying depth, flowing across the floorboards like spilled ink. It moved with a fluid, predatory grace, heading straight for my feet. I kicked at it, but my foot passed through it as if it were smoke. Yet the coldness of it seeped through my boot, freezing my bones. I grabbed the candle and blew it out, plunging the room into darkness. The shadow vanished instantly. I stood there in the pitch black, panting, listening to the frantic beating of my own heart. "It's just fear," I muttered to myself. "Sleep deprivation, stress." I fumbled for my flashlight and clicked it on. The beam cut through the dark, revealing the empty room. The floor was bare, no shadow, just the normal faint shadow cast by the flashlight itself, short and sharp beneath my feet. I let out a shaky laugh, feeling foolish. I had let my imagination run wild. I climbed into bed, pulling the covers up to my chin, and forced myself to close my eyes. Sleep did not come easily. Every time I drifted off, I felt a cold spot near my feet, a presence hovering just above me. Morning brought a pale gray light that did little to dispel the gloom of the house. I woke up exhausted, my body aching as if I had run a marathon. I sat up and looked at the floor. Nothing, just dust and wood. I laughed aloud, the sound echoing strangely in the quiet room. "See?" I said to the empty air. "Nothing there, just a dream." I got dressed and went downstairs to explore the rest of the house, determined to prove to myself that it was just an old, creaky building and nothing more. I spent the day cleaning, fixing a leak in the roof, and organizing the supplies. The work was hard, physical, and it helped to clear my mind. By afternoon, I felt almost normal. The incident with the shadow seemed like a distant memory, a product of fatigue and the eerie atmosphere. I decided to take a walk around the property to inspect the mill wheel in the creek. The air outside was crisp, the smell of pine overwhelming the scent of rot caused by a fish breaking the surface. As I stood there, looking at the reflection of the trees in the black water, I noticed something wrong. The sun was high in the sky, directly overhead. My reflection in the water should have been directly beneath me, with no shadow visible in the water itself, since the light was coming from above. But in the water, my reflection had a shadow, a long, dark shape stretching out from the feet of my reflection, pointing toward the house. I blinked, rubbing my eyes. It was impossible. Light doesn't work that way. I looked up at the sky, confirming the position of the sun. Then I looked back down. The shadow in the water was moving. It was detaching itself from my reflection, rising up out of the water like a dark mist. It climbed onto the bank, solidifying as it hit the mud, becoming a two-dimensional silhouette that slid across the ground toward me. I stumbled back, my heart leaping into my throat. "No," I whispered. "Not again." The shadow reached my feet and merged with my own shadow, which was now cast normally on the ground by the sun. But I could feel it, a weight, a coldness, a presence that wasn't mine. It felt like wearing a wet coat that I couldn't take off. I ran back to the house, slamming the door behind me and locking it. I leaned against the wood, gasping for air. "It followed me," I said aloud, the reality of it sinking in. "It followed me home." But I wasn't home. This was just a rental, a temporary stop. I needed to leave. I packed my bag frantically, throwing in my clothes, my laptop, my toiletries. I didn't care about the deposit, the job, the solitude. I just wanted to be away from this place, from that thing. I grabbed my keys and rushed to the car. I threw the bag in the back seat and jumped into the driver's seat. I turned the key. The engine cranked but didn't start. I tried again. Nothing, just a clicking sound. I tried a third time, panic rising in my chest. The battery was dead. But I had driven here yesterday. The battery was fine. I popped the hood and checked the terminals. They were corroded, covered in a thick black sludge that looked like tar. I wiped it away with a rag, but it smeared, sticky and foul-smelling. It was useless. I was stranded. I slammed the hood shut and kicked the tire in frustration. "Damn it!" I shouted. The sound echoed through the trees, silenced almost instantly by the oppressive atmosphere. I looked around, half expecting to see the shadow creeping toward me from the woods, but the clearing was empty. Just the house, the car, and the trees. I decided to wait until morning to try the car again, or maybe walk to the main road if it wasn't too far. I went back inside the house, locking the door behind me. I barricaded it with a heavy chair, feeling ridiculous but unable to shake the fear. I spent the rest of the day pacing the room, watching the windows, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. The house remained silent, the dust undisturbed. As evening approached, the temperature dropped sharply. I lit the candles again, huddling in the corner of the room, far away from the walls where shadows could hide. Night fell, and with it came the darkness. The candles flickered, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to stretch and twist on their own. I watched them closely, terrified that one of them would detach again. Hours passed. Nothing happened. My eyelids grew heavy, the exhaustion of the day catching up with me. I convinced myself that I was safe, that the shadow was just a trick of the light, a hallucination brought on by stress. I lay down on the bed, keeping the flashlight clutched in my hand. I closed my eyes, listening to the silence, and then I heard it. A sound, soft, rhythmic, like breathing. But it wasn't coming from me. It was coming from the corner of the room where the deepest shadow pooled. I opened my eyes and shone the flashlight at the corner. The beam illuminated the empty space. Nothing there. But the breathing continued, slow, deep inhalations, followed by long, shuddering exhalations. It sounded hungry. I sat up, gripping the flashlight tightly. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice shaking. The breathing stopped. Silence returned. I waited, my heart pounding. Then the candle on the dresser flickered and went out, though there was no draft. Then the next one, and the next, until the room was plunged into darkness, save for the beam of my flashlight. I swept the beam around the room. The shadows were gone, all of them. The room was brightly lit by the flashlight, with no dark corners, no places for anything to hide. I sighed in relief. "Gotcha," I muttered. But then I looked down at my own feet. My shadow was missing. The flashlight was casting a shadow of the chair, the bed, the table. But where my shadow should have been, there was nothing, just the illuminated floor. A wave of terror washed over me, colder than anything I had felt before. I wasn't casting a shadow because it wasn't attached to me anymore. It was somewhere else. "Where are you?" I whispered, spinning around, and then I saw it. On the ceiling. My shadow was on the ceiling, staring down at me. It was larger than life, distorted and grotesque, its limbs elongated, its fingers claw-like. It was peeling itself off the plaster, dripping downward like black tar. It fell silently, landing on the floor in front of me with a soft splash. It rose up, forming a humanoid shape that towered over me. It had no face, just a smooth, featureless void where features should be. But I could feel its attention focused entirely on me. It reached out a hand, a flat, black blade of darkness. I scrambled backward, falling off the bed, crawling toward the door. The shadow glided after me, moving faster than I could crawl. It reached me, its cold touch grazing my ankle. I screamed, kicking out, but my leg passed through it. The coldness spread up my leg, numbing the flesh, freezing the bone. I managed to scramble to my feet and throw open the door, stumbling into the hallway. The shadow followed, pouring out of the room like smoke. I ran down the hall, slipping on the dusty floorboards, crashing into the wall. The shadow was everywhere now, filling the hallway, blocking my path to the stairs. It stretched from wall to wall, a curtain of darkness that I couldn't pass. I turned and ran the other way, toward the window at the end of the hall. The shadow pursued, gaining on me, the coldness radiating from it, making the air crackle with frost. I reached the window and hammered on the glass, but it wouldn't budge. Painted shut. I grabbed the heavy brass lamp from the table beside me and smashed it against the pane. The glass shattered, raining shards onto the floor. I climbed onto the sill, the cold night air hitting my face. Behind me, the shadow surged forward, a tidal wave of blackness. I jumped, falling through the air, landing hard in the bushes below. I didn't wait to check for injuries. I scrambled to my feet and ran toward the car. Maybe the battery would work now. Maybe the corrosion was gone. I yanked the door open and jumped in, turning the key. The engine roared to life instantly. I didn't hesitate. I slammed the car into reverse, spinning the tires in the mud, and sped down the driveway. I looked in the rearview mirror. The house was receding, disappearing into the fog. But in the mirror, I saw something else. In the back seat of my car, sitting right behind me, was a shadow. It was small, compact, huddled in the corner. It wasn't moving. It was just waiting. I screamed and swerved the car, fishtailing on the muddy track. I looked back. The back seat was empty, just leather and dust. I laughed hysterically, tears streaming down my face. Hallucination, I gasped. Just stress. I focused on the road, driving faster, desperate to put miles between me and that cursed place. I drove for hours, not stopping, until I reached the main highway, the lights of a town glowing in the distance. I pulled into a gas station, the bright fluorescent lights feeling like a sanctuary. I jumped out of the car, my legs shaking so badly I could barely stand. I went inside the convenience store, buying a bottle of water and a candy bar, just to be around people. The clerk, a young guy with headphones around his neck, looked at me with concern. "You okay, man?" he asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I laughed, a jagged, broken sound. "Something like that," I said. "Just long drive." I paid and went back to my car, feeling slightly better under the glare of the station lights. I got in, locked the doors, and took a long drink of water. I looked in the rearview mirror again. The back seat was empty. I let out a long breath. "It's over," I whispered. "I'm out. It's over." I started the car and merged onto the highway, heading toward the city, toward home. The drive was uneventful, the hum of the tires soothing my frayed nerves. I arrived at my apartment complex just as the sun was beginning to rise. I parked in my spot, exhausted but relieved. I grabbed my bag and walked to the elevator, punching the button for the 4th floor. The ride-up was smooth, quiet. I unlocked my apartment door and stepped inside, the familiar smell of my own space welcoming me. I dropped my bag on the couch and collapsed onto the sofa, closing my eyes. I was safe. I was home. The mill house was hundreds of miles away. The shadow was gone. I drifted off to sleep, the first peaceful sleep I had had in days. I woke up some time later, disoriented. The room was dark, the curtains drawn. I must have slept through the day. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, and reached for the lamp on the side table. I clicked it on. The light flooded the room, warm and yellow, and then I saw it. On the wall opposite the sofa, my shadow was cast by the lamp, but it wasn't mimicking me. I was sitting on the couch, leaning forward. My shadow was standing. It was upright, its arms hanging loosely at its sides, its head tilted slightly to the side, just like in the mill house. My blood ran cold. I froze, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. I watched as the shadow on the wall slowly turned its head to look at me. It raised a hand and pointed at the door. Then it stepped off the wall, sliding across the floor toward me. "No," I whispered, backing away on the couch. "I left you there. I left you at the mill." The shadow didn't stop. It flowed over the coffee table, up the leg of the couch, and onto my lap. It was cold, so cold it burned. It wrapped around me, clinging to my skin, seeping into my clothes. I screamed, thrashing, trying to tear it off, but it was part of me now, It merged with my body, sinking into my pores, filling my veins with ice. I fell back onto the couch, paralyzed, unable to move, unable to speak. The shadow covered my face, blinding me, suffocating me, and in the darkness I heard a voice. It wasn't a human voice. It was the sound of grinding stones, of rushing water, of wind through dead trees. "You can never leave," it whispered. "You brought me home. Now we are one. Forever." I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My mouth was sealed shut. My limbs were locked. I was trapped inside my own body, a prisoner of the shadow. I could feel it controlling me, moving my arms, my legs. I stood up, but I didn't want to. I walked to the mirror in the hallway, but I didn't want to. I looked into the glass. My reflection stared back at me, but my eyes were black pits of emptiness. And behind my reflection, standing in the room that wasn't there, was the mill house. It was inside my apartment. It was inside my mind. The shadow smiled, a terrible, stretching grin that split my face. "Welcome home," it said, and then it began to rewrite me, changing my memories, my thoughts, my very essence. I was no longer Elias Thorne. I was something else, something dark, something that belonged to the mill. Days passed, or maybe weeks. I didn't know. I was aware, but I had no control. I went to work, but I didn't remember the job. I talked to people, but I didn't remember the conversations. I was a puppet, and the shadow was the puppeteer. People noticed the change. "You look different," my coworker said. "Darker, tired." I smiled, but it wasn't my smile. It was the shadow's smile. "Just stress?" I heard myself say, the voice sounding foreign in my ears. "Just a long trip." At night, I didn't sleep. The shadow didn't need sleep. It stood by the window, looking out at the city, waiting. Waiting for what? I didn't know, but I could feel its hunger. It wanted more. It wanted to spread. It wanted to bring others to the mill house, or maybe it wanted to turn everyone into shadows. One night, I found myself packing a bag. Again, clothes, toiletries, maps. I was going back, not because I wanted to, but because the shadow commanded it. "We need to feed," it whispered in my mind. "The mill is hungry." I drove out of the city, heading back toward Blackwood Creek. The journey was a blur, a nightmare of flashing lights and twisting roads. When I arrived at the mill house, it looked different, larger, more imposing. The mill wheel was turning now, grinding slowly, churning the black water. The house seemed to pulse with a dark energy. I parked the car and walked up the porch steps. The door opened before I touched it. Inside, the house was alive. Shadows danced on the walls, detached and free, swirling in a chaotic dance. They greeted me, or rather, greeted the thing inside me. "Welcome back," they hissed in unison. "Bring us more." I understood then the shadow hadn't followed me home to haunt me. It had followed me home to use my connection to the world of the living to lure others here. I was the bait, and I couldn't stop it. I sat at the desk in the upstairs room, the same desk where I had worked before, and opened my laptop. I began to write. A new listing, a new advertisement. "Historic mill house available for immediate occupancy. Caretaker position included. Rent is nominal requirement. Must be comfortable with silence and old architecture. No pets, no visitors." I posted it on the forums, on the social media sites, everywhere I could reach. And then I waited. The shadow coiled around me, satisfied, purring like a cat. "Good," it whispered. "Soon they will come. Soon We will grow. I looked out the window at the dark creek. At the turning wheel, I saw my reflection in the glass. But it wasn't me anymore. It was the shadow, wearing my skin like a suit. And behind me, in the reflection, I saw the faces of the others, the previous caretakers, the victims. Their eyes were black, their mouths sewn shut with threads of darkness. They were waiting too, waiting for the next traveler, the next name to add to the collection. The cycle continued. The shadow followed, and the mill house waited, always waiting, always hungry. And I was just the vessel, the conduit, the bridge between the light and the dark. There was no escape. There never was. Because the shadow doesn't just follow you home. It becomes your home. It becomes you. And once it's inside, it never leaves. It just waits for the next opportunity to spread, to consume, to rewrite. The sun set, casting long shadows across the room. My shadow stretched out, longer than it should be, reaching toward the door. It was ready. We were ready. The listing was live. The trap was set. And somewhere out there, someone was reading it. Someone who needed silence. Someone who was running from the noise. Someone who would laugh at the warning. Do not stay after dark if you value your shadow. They would think it was a joke, just local color, and they would drive down the unpaved road, through the tunnel of trees, to the mill house. And they would meet us, and the collection would grow, one soul at a time, one shadow at a time, forever. The horror isn't the monster in the dark. It's realizing that the monster is already inside you, and it's been there all along, waiting for the right moment to take the wheel, to drive you home to the mill house, where the shadows live and where you will soon join them. And that's where this story ends. Let's move on to the next one. The nursery upstairs still plays lullabies, but no children ever lived here. I should have turned back at the mailbox. It leaned like a drunk against the overgrown hydrangeas, its red paint blistered and peeling, the brass number 7 hanging by one screw. Blackwood House. The name on the Airbnb listing: historic Victorian gem, grand views, perfect for writers seeking solitude. Sounded majestic. In person it looked like a tomb that had forgotten its own funeral, but the price was impossible to ignore. $38 a night for an entire house, deep in the Blue Ridge foothills. No neighbors for a mile in any direction. My advance from the publisher had vanished faster than steam on a winter morning, and my agent's latest email: "Arthur, the manuscript is due in 42 days. Let's not discuss extensions again," still glowed on my cracked phone screen. Desperation makes fools of us all. So I ignored the way the trees seemed to lean inward over the driveway, blocking the late afternoon sun, and I ignored the silence. Not peaceful quiet. The kind of silence that feels like held breath. The key was under a cracked garden gnome, its ceramic smile chipped, one eye missing. The front door opened with a groan that sounded like pain. The air inside hit me. Dust, old wood, and beneath it, that damp mineral smell. Wet stone and cold iron. Standard for old houses, I told myself. Just needs airing out. The listing photos had been staged, bright, filtered, focusing on the ornate staircase, the bay window in the parlor. Reality was dimmer, heavier. High ceiling swallowed light. Wallpaper, once rich burgundy damask, peeled in long curling strips. Furniture huddled under yellowed sheets like sleeping ghosts. No Wi-Fi password on the fridge, no welcome note. Just a single sheet of paper, taped to the dusty mantle. Welcome. Utilities functional. Heat is temperamental. wood stove in kitchen. Upstairs, master, study, nursery. Do not enter nursery unless absolutely necessary. Monsieur Blackwood. Nursery. The word snagged in my mind. Why designate a nursery in a rental? And why the warning? Unless absolutely necessary. Necessary for what? Changing a non-existent baby? I dropped my duffel in the master bedroom, a cavernous space with a 4-poster bed draped in a faded quilt. The window faced the encroaching woods. No view, just darkness gathering between the trees. I checked my phone. 1 bar. Flickered. Died. Dinner was a can of beans heated on the gas stove. Functional, surprisingly. The kitchen was the only room that felt vaguely lived in. A scarred wooden table, mismatched chairs, a wood stove radiating a welcome, dry heat. As I ate, the house settled around me. Floorboards sighed, pipes ticked, normal sounds. I repeated it like a prayer. Then, just as I scraped the last of the beans from the can, I heard it. Faint, tinny, melodic, a music box. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. It came from upstairs. I froze. Spoon halfway to my mouth. Twinkle, twinkle is ubiquitous. A phone notification? But my phone was dead. A radio left on? I'd seen no electronics, just dusty lamps and a rotary phone on the hall table. The tune played through, simple, slightly off-key, the notes thin and metallic, and ended with a soft click. Silence rushed back in, thicker than before, probably old wiring. A speaker somewhere triggered by temperature change? Heat from the stove affecting the circuit? I forced myself to finish eating, my ears straining. Nothing, just the tick-tick-tick of the stove, cooling. I decided to explore, get familiar. Master bedroom, done. Study, small. Desk, chair, empty bookshelves, just dust and shadows. Then the third door at the end of the hall, the nursery. It looked like the others, dark wood, tarnished knob, but the air around it felt different, colder, not drafty cold, still cold, like the air inside hadn't moved in decades. The sign on the mantle echoed, "Do not enter nursery unless absolutely necessary." Curiosity, that fatal human itch, overrode caution. I grasped the knob. It turned easily, too easily. I pushed the door open. The smell hit first, baby powder. Not the modern chemical kind, the old-fashioned talcum-heavy scent, cloying and sweet, layered over the deeper damp and dust. It was startlingly present, as if someone had shaken a bottle moments before. The room was small, dominated by a white iron crib in the center, its mattress bare. A wooden rocking horse stood in the corner, its paint chipped, one glass eye cracked. A changing table with peeling enamel. A low bookshelf held faded cloth books. Goodnight moon, the very hungry caterpillar, their spines cracked. On the wall, a framed print of a smiling sun, its yellow faded to a sickly ochre. And on a small claw-footed table beside the crib, a music box. Rectangular, walnut veneer, tarnished brass inlay. It looked antique, well cared for, utterly out of place, amidst the decay. Its lid was closed. I stepped inside, the floorboards silent beneath my sneakers. The cold intensified, raising goosebumps on my arms. I approached the music box. No visible latch, just a smooth, seamless lid. I touched it. The wood was ice cold. As my fingertip brushed the brass inlay, the lid sprang open with a soft snick. Inside, a tiny, intricate cylinder studded with pins. No figure, just the mechanism. And as the lid opened, the cylinder began to turn. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. The sound was louder here, clearer, yet still carrying that thin, metallic fragility. It filled the small room, bouncing off the bare walls. I stared transfixed as the pins engaged the comb, producing the familiar, haunting melody. It played through, ending with the same soft click. The cylinder stopped. The lid snapped shut. Silence. My heart hammered against my ribs. How? It hadn't been wound. I hadn't touched a key. I hadn't even pressed it. Just a brush of my finger. I backed out of the room, pulling the door shut firmly behind me. My hands were shaking. Coincidence. Spring mechanism triggered by movement. Temperature differential. The excuses felt flimsy. Paper shields against a rising tide of dread. I spent the evening in the kitchen, stove roaring, laptop open on the table. The blank document glared back. Chapter 1. I typed 2 sentences, deleted them. The silence pressed in, heavy and watchful. Every creak from upstairs made me flinch. I kept waiting for the music box. It didn't play. Exhaustion finally won. I took a quick, lukewarm shower in the clawfoot tub, water pressure weak, pipes groaning, and headed for the master bedroom. As I passed the nursery door, I paused. It was slightly ajar. I was certain I'd closed it. Firmly, I pushed it shut again, harder this time. Click. The latch caught. I slept fitfully. Dreams of cold rooms and silent cribs. Woke at 3:17 a.m., drenched in sweat despite the chill. Heart races for no reason I could name. Then I heard it. Not the music box. A lullaby. A woman's voice. Soft, breathy, achingly tender. Singing wordless nonsense syllables. Hush-a-bye, don't you cry. But the tune was unmistakably Brahms' lullaby. It came from the nursery. I lay frozen. Blankets pulled to my chin, listening. The voice wasn't loud. It was intimate, like someone was leaning over a crib, singing directly to a child just feet away. It held a depth of sorrow that made my throat tighten, a love so profound it bordered on pain. It lasted maybe 30 seconds, then faded, dissolving into the silence like smoke. No music box. Click. Just gone. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Listened until dawn painted the ceiling gray. Morning brought weak sunlight and a desperate need for normalcy. Coffee. Black. Strong. I sat at the kitchen table, laptop open, forcing words onto the page. Chapter 1. Again. The house on Sycamore Street looked ordinary. I deleted it. Blackwood House loomed. Deleted. My fingers felt stiff, clumsy. Tap. I jumped. Coffee sloshed over the rim of my mug. Tap, tap. From upstairs, from the nursery, not the music box, not the voice. This was rhythmic, deliberate, like fingernails. Lightly tapping on the inside of the crib's iron bars. Tap, 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 tap. I set the mug down carefully. My pulse roared in my ears. Animal. Squirrel in the walls, bird in the chimney. But squirrels didn't tap in rhythm. Birds didn't sound so patient. The tapping stopped. Silence. I waited 5 minutes. 10. Nothing. Maybe it was over. Maybe the night terrors were just that. Terrors of the night. I needed air, real air. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the back door. French doors leading to a neglected patio. They were stiff, swollen in the frame. I wrestled them open, the wood groaning in protest. The backyard was a tangle of weeds and skeletal rose bushes. At the far edge, near the tree line, stood a small stone structure. A shed? I walked towards it, crunching on dead leaves. It wasn't a shed, it was a mausoleum. Small, square, built of the same gray fieldstone as the house. Ivy choked its base. A wrought iron gate, rusted shut, barred the entrance. Through the bars, I could see a single stone slab inside. No inscription, just a smooth, dark rectangle. A family crypt? For who? The listing mentioned the Blackwoods owned it for generations, but MC Blackwood sounded like a property manager, not a descendant. A cold wind snaked through the trees, carrying the scent of damp earth and decay. I turned back toward the house and froze. In the upstairs window, the window of the nursery, a figure stood, small, pale, indistinct, like smoke given momentary shape behind a grimy glass, watching me. My breath caught. I blinked. Hard. The figure was gone. Just the empty window, the peeling paint of the sill, the dark interior beyond. Trick of the light. Shadow. Branch. Moving. The rationalizations were automatic, rote, but my legs wouldn't move. My skin felt too tight. I fled back inside, slamming the French doors, leaning against them, chest heaving. Okay, time to leave. Screw the deposit, screw the manuscript. I grabbed my duffel, shoved in my laptop, my notes, the half-finished manuscript. My hands were slick with sweat. I needed to get to the car. Now. I sprinted for the front door, fumbling the key from my pocket. It slid into the lock. I turned it. It didn't budge. I turned it again. Harder. Nothing. The deadbolt was thrown. From the inside, panic, cold and sharp, lanced through me. I rattled the knob. Solid. I pounded on the heavy wood. Hello? Is someone there? My voice sounded thin, ridiculous. Silence. I ran to the kitchen, tried the back door. Same thing. Locked tight. The windows. Sash windows, old and painted shut. I grabbed a chair, smashed the lower pane of the nearest one. Glass rained down. I reached through, fumbling for the latch. It was padlocked. From the outside, a whimper escaped me. Trapped. I sank to the floor, back against the cabinet, duffel bag clutched to my chest like a shield. The rational world had dissolved. This wasn't faulty wiring. This wasn't imagination. This was intention. The house held me, and it wanted me to go upstairs. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. The only sound was my own ragged breathing and the frantic drumming of my heart. Then faintly, from above, click, the music box lid opening. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. The melody drifted down the stairs, clear and cold. It didn't stop at the end. It started again and again. A loop, insistent, summoning. I couldn't stay on the floor. I couldn't stay in the kitchen. The music was a hook in my chest, reeling me in. I stood up. My legs trembled. I walked to the bottom of the staircase. The ornate banister felt like ice under my sweaty palm. Twinkle, twinkle. Step by step, I climbed. Each tread groaned under my weight, the sound swallowed by the relentless tinny lullaby. The air grew colder with every step. The smell of baby powder intensified, mixing with the damp stone smell until it was almost nauseating. I reached the top. The hallway stretched before me, the master door, the study door, and at the end, the nursery door. It was wide open. The music poured out, louder now, filling the corridor. I walked towards it, drawn by a force stronger than fear. I stopped in the doorway. The room was exactly as I'd left it. Crib, rocking horse, changing table, bookshelf. Except the music box was open, its cylinder spinning, pins clicking against the comb. And the white iron crib, it was rocking, slowly, gently, as if someone had just leaned over and given it a soft push. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The rocking slowed, stopped. The music box played its final notes. Click, the lid snapped shut. Silence crashed down, heavier than before. Then, from inside the crib, a sound, a soft sigh. Not a cry, not a gurgle, a sigh of contentment, of expectation. My vision swam. The edges of the room darkened. The cold wasn't just on my skin anymore. It was in my lungs, in my bones. I took a step forward, into the room, towards the crib. My hand, acting of its own accord, reached out, not towards the music box, towards the crib's rail. I gripped the cold iron and looked inside. The mattress was bare, white ticking, stained with age. But in the very center, pressed into the thin padding, was an indentation, a perfect, small, oval-shaped depression, like the impression left by a head, a baby's head. Beside it, 2 smaller indentations, where tiny hands might rest. The sigh came again, closer this time, right beside my ear. A breath, cold as a winter grave, brushed my neck. Hush-a-bye. The voice wasn't upstairs anymore. It was here, in the room, singing to the empty space, to the impression at the mattress, to me. I understood then, with a clarity that froze my soul. No children ever lived here, but one had died here, born too soon, or too sick, or lost in the night, and the mother, M. Blackwood, Margaret, Martha, had never let go. Her grief had seeped into the stones, the wood, the very air. It had bound her spirit to this room, to this crib, to the ritual of the lullaby, the music box, the rocking. She wasn't warning guests away from danger. She was warning them away from herself, from the desperate, eternal need to care for the child she lost, from the compulsion to find someone, anyone, to stand beside her in the nursery, to witness the empty crib, to acknowledge the space where her baby should have been, to be the audience for her endless, sorrowful lullaby. The sigh came again, right against my temple, a plea wrapped in ice. My body moved. I didn't will it. It just happened. I lifted my hand from the crib rail, not to flee, to push, gently. The crib began to rock, slowly, steadily, back and forth, back and forth. As it moved, the music box lid sprang open. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. The melody filled the room, warm and bright and utterly, devastatingly wrong. From the corner, near the cracked-eyed rocking horse, a new sound began, a woman's soft sob, not of anguish, of relief. "Thank you," the sob seemed to say. "Thank you for seeing him." I kept pushing the crib, rocking it, rocking the empty space, rocking the impression in the mattress. The sobbing softened, merged with the music box. Twinkle, twinkle. The cold lessened, just a fraction. A fragile warmth, like weak sunshine, touched my back. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my marrow, colder and more final than any locked door, that I would never leave Blackwood House. The manuscript was forgotten. The deadline meant nothing. My hands had found their purpose. They knew the rhythm. They would rock and rock and rock. Long after the music box wound down, long after the sobs faded, long after the last echo of the lullaby dissolved into the silence, waiting for the next sigh, for the next cold breath on my neck, for the next time the crib needed pushing. The nursery was no longer empty. It had a caretaker. With that, the story is over. Let's move to the next story. I rented a room that comes with a previous tenant still living in it. I should have known something was wrong the moment I saw the listing. It popped up on a sketchy rental site I only used in emergencies. After my third roommate in 6 months bailed without notice, taking half my deposit in my favorite coffee mug with her, the ad was sparse, almost defiant in its minimalism. Private room and quiet house, fully furnished, utilities included, 275-month, no credit check, immediate move-in, must be quiet after 10 p.m. No photos, no address, just a cross street in the old mill district of Blackwater Falls, a town I'd only heard of in passing. The contact number led to a voicemail with a voice so soft it was almost a whisper. Leave your name and say why you're alone. Creepy? Absolutely. Desperate? Also yes. I left my name, Daniel Reeves, and added, my girlfriend left. My dog died. I just need a place to disappear for a while. Less than an hour later, a text came through. Room's yours. Come tonight. Key under the blue pot. No lease, no ID, no questions. I drove into Blackwater Falls as the sun dipped below the pines, casting long skeletal shadows across the road. The town felt suspended in time. Gas lamps flickered on Main Street. Storefronts bore hand-painted signs, and the only sound was the distant rush of the river cutting through the gorge. The house was on Sycamore Lane, a narrow street lined with elms so tall they blotted out the moon. It was a 2-story brick craftsman, paint peeling like sunburnt skin, with a sagging porch and a single lit window on the second floor. The blue pot sat beside the door, cracked and filled with dead ivy. Under it, an old iron key cold to the touch. The door opened with a groan. Inside, the air was thick, not dusty, but stale, like breath held too long. The entryway smelled of lavender and something faintly metallic like old pennies. A hallway stretched ahead, lined with closed doors. At the end, a staircase spiraled upward, its banister carved with strange whorls that looked almost like eyes if you stared too long. A note was taped to the fridge. Room is upstairs, last door on the left. Rent in cash on the first. Do not enter other rooms. Do not use the basement. Be quiet after 10. He doesn't like noise. M. Holloway. I frowned. He? The listing never mentioned another tenant, but the room, when I found it, was perfect, spacious, with hardwood floors, a bay window overlooking the backyard, and a cast-iron bed with crisp white sheets. A small desk, a wardrobe, a reading lamp, even a record player in the corner, though no records were visible. The bathroom down the hall was clean, with hot water and thick towels. It felt staged, like a museum exhibit titled Life of a Normal Person. I dropped my duffel bag on the bed and exhaled. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of peace. Then I heard it, a soft thump from the room next door, like someone shifting in bed. I froze. The house was supposed to be empty except for me. I checked the door I just passed, second on the left. It was slightly ajar. Darkness yawned beyond. I knocked. Hello? Anyone there? Silence. I pushed the door open. The room was identical to mine. Same bed, same desk, same window, but everything was worn. The sheets were gray with use, the rug frayed, the mirror above the dresser fogged with age. And on the desk, a half-empty glass of water, a paperback novel splayed open, and a steaming mug of tea. The tea was still hot. My pulse jumped. I backed out and shut the door. That night, I ate a protein bar and lay in bed, listening. At 10:03 p.m., the floorboards creaked. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the hallway. They stopped outside my door. I held my breath, a soft sigh, long and tired, pressed against the wood. Then silence. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I found a note slipped under my door. Sorry I startled you. I didn't know someone new was moving in. I've been here a while. Please don't tell the landlady I can't leave yet. No signature. The handwriting was neat, looping, almost feminine, but the voice in my head from last night had been male. I showed the note to Mrs. Holloway when she dropped by to check the furnace. She was in her 70s, with sharp eyes and a bun so tight it pulled the wrinkles from her face. "Previous tenant?" she said, stirring her tea with a silver spoon. "No, dear, you're the only one." "But I saw his room, his things, his tea was hot." She didn't look up. "The house plays tricks. Grief does that. You've been through a lot, haven't you?" I hadn't told her about my girlfriend or my dog. I didn't mention the note again. But that night, at 10:02, the footsteps returned. This time, I opened the door. The hallway was empty, but the door to the neighboring room was open. Inside, the tea was gone. In its place, a fresh slice of bread on a china plate, crusts cut off, just like my mom used to make. My throat tightened. "Who are you?" I called into the room. A whisper came from the closet. "Someone who stayed too long." I slammed the door and locked it from the outside. The next day, I tried to ignore it. I wrote in my journal, took walks by the river, pretended the house was normal. But at 5 p.m., I came back to find my bed neatly made, though I'd left it rumpled. My clothes were folded in the drawer, though I'd tossed them on the chair. And on my pillow, a single white feather. That evening, I sat on the edge of the bed and waited. At 10 p.m., the doorknob turned. Slowly. I didn't move. The door opened 6 inches. A hand appeared, pale, bony with chipped nails, and placed a small wrapped parcel on the floor. Then it retreated. I waited 10 minutes before picking it up. Inside, a Polaroid. It showed me, asleep in this very bed, moonlight on my face. The timestamp in the corner read, October 12th, 1998. I hadn't been born until 1995. But the photo? It felt real. The sheets were the same. The angle was identical. I checked the neighboring room again. This time, I went inside and searched. The wardrobe contained men's clothes, sweaters, slacks, a pair of worn loafers. All smelled faintly of cedar and mildew. In the nightstand drawer, a wallet. Inside, a driver's license. Name, Julian Voss. Dobb, March 3rd, 1971. Address, 47 Sycamore Lane, Blackwater Falls. The photo showed a gaunt man with hollow eyes and a sad smile. The expiration date, October 1998. I stumbled back, heart hammering. Julian had been dead for over 20 years, and yet his tea was hot, his bread was fresh, his footsteps echoed nightly. I ran downstairs and banged on Mrs. Holloway's door. She opened it in a housecoat, unsurprised. "I told you," she said softly, "you're the only tenant." "But Julian Voss lived here. He never left," she interrupted. "Not really." She invited me in and poured 2 cups of tea. The steam curled like ghosts. "Julian rented that room in 1996, she said. "He was a writer, quiet, kind. He came to Blackwater Falls to finish his novel, said the quiet would help." She paused, stirring her tea slowly. "One night, he didn't come down for dinner. I knocked. No answer. I used my key. He was sitting at his desk, pen in hand, eyes open. Heart just stopped. No warning. I called the coroner. They took him away. I cleaned the room, put it back on the market. But no one stayed long. They'd hear him, moving, breathing, sighing. Some said he'd tuck them in at night. Others said he'd leave notes asking for company. She looked at me. He doesn't mean harm. He's just lonely. And the house. It holds on to people who aren't ready to go. "Then why rent the room?" I demanded. "Because," she said quietly, "if no one lives there, he grows stronger. The house needs a witness, someone to see him, to keep him anchored. Otherwise, she didn't finish. I moved out the next morning, or tried to. My car wouldn't start. My phone lost signal. When I walked to the bus station, I got turned around in the woods behind the house and found myself back on Sycamore Lane an hour later, shoes muddy, hands shaking. That night, Julian left another gift, a journal, on the first page in his handwriting. If you're reading this, you're like me. You don't belong anywhere else. I read it all. Julian had come to Blackwater Falls after his wife left him. His publisher dropped him. His dog died. Sound familiar? He wrote that the house spoke to him. Softly at first, then louder. It promised peace, quiet, an end to loneliness. But the price was staying, forever. He tried to leave once, made it to the county line, woke up back in his bed, sheets cold, heart racing. The house wouldn't let him go. Now it had me. I stopped fighting. I started leaving my door open at night. At 10:07, Julian would appear, just a silhouette at first, then more solid as the weeks passed. He never spoke, just watched me sleep, sometimes adjusting my blanket if I kicked it off. One night, I woke to find him sitting in the chair by the window, staring at the moon. "Why me?" I whispered. His voice was like dry leaves. "Because you wanted to disappear. The house only takes those who are already halfway gone." I didn't leave after that. Why would I? Out there, the world is loud, cruel, indifferent. Here, I have company. Here, I'm seen. Last week, I left a note for the next tenant. "Don't be afraid of the man in the next room. He's just like you. And if you listen closely at night, you'll hear him breathing and know you're not alone." Mrs. Holloway brought up a new mattress yesterday. Said someone answered the listing. A young woman, sad eyes, carrying one suitcase. She moved into my room. I'm in Julian's now, and tonight at 10 p.m., I'll slip a slice of bread onto her pillow because the house always needs a new witness, and the previous tenant never really leaves. And this story ends here. The next one begins now. The house where every picture changes while you sleep. I never intended to stay in that house. It was the summer of 2023, and I just lost my job at the marketing firm in Chicago. Rent was due, and my savings were evaporating faster than morning dew on a hot sidewalk. I needed somewhere cheap, somewhere temporary, while I got back on my feet. That's how I ended up scrolling through listings on a dodgy sublet board called Room Rift, where people posted everything from converted garages to basement hideouts with no windows and questionable wiring. Most listings were scams or smelled like desperation. But then I saw it. Historic Victorian home, fully furnished room, 300 mo, utilities included, immediate occupancy. The photos showed a tall, narrow house on the outskirts of a small town called Harrow's End, about 2 hours northwest of the city. It looked old, but well-maintained, with ornate woodwork, bay windows, and a wraparound porch sagging slightly under decades of Midwestern weather. The room for rent was on the second floor, spacious, with a clawfoot tub in the ensuite bathroom and a large window overlooking the overgrown backyard. The landlord, a woman named Evelyn Marsh, replied to my inquiry within minutes. "I don't usually rent out rooms," she wrote, "but the house has been empty since my husband passed. I'd rather someone live there than let it rot." She didn't ask for references, didn't run a credit check, just said to bring a month's rent in cash and show up Saturday morning. No lease, no questions. It should have been a red flag, but I was broke, exhausted, and the idea of a quiet place to regroup, somewhere I could write, reflect, maybe even start a novel, felt like salvation. So I packed my duffel bag, threw my laptop and a few changes of clothes in the trunk of my aging Honda Civic, and drove through the cornfields until the GPS whispered, "You have arrived." The house loomed at the end of a dirt road surrounded by dense woods. It was even more imposing in person, 3 stories of weathered gray clapboard with peeling paint and a turret on the left side that looked like something out of a Gothic fairy tale. The front porch creaked under my weight, and the screen door groaned like it hadn't been opened in years. Evelyn was waiting inside. She was in her late 60s, with steel gray hair pulled into a tight bun and eyes that didn't quite meet mine. She handed me a brass key on a frayed red ribbon. "Your room's at the top of the stairs, second door on the right," she said, voice dry as autumn leaves. "The others are locked. Don't try them." I nodded, too tired to question it. She didn't offer a tour, didn't say goodbye, just turned and walked down the hall toward the kitchen, her slippers whispering against the hardwood. The room was exactly as pictured, except for one thing I hadn't noticed before. The walls were covered in framed photographs, dozens of them, black and white and sepia-toned, some in ornate gilded frames, others in simple wood. Portraits of stiff-backed men in suits, women in high-collared dresses, children with solemn eyes, family gatherings on porches, picnics in fields, group shots in front of churches. None were labeled, none looked recent. Everything seemed to date from the late 1800s to the 1940s. I assumed they'd been left behind, part of the house's historic charm, as Evelyn called it. I didn't think much of it. I hung my clothes, plugged in my laptop, and collapsed onto the 4-poster bed. The mattress was firm but comfortable. Outside, crickets sang, and the wind rustled through the trees. For the first time in weeks, I felt calm. I fell asleep almost instantly. I woke up to the sound of scratching, not loud, just a soft rhythmic scrape, like fingernails on glass. I sat up, heart pounding, and looked around. Moonlight filtered through the curtains. Everything was still. The scratching stopped. I told myself it was a branch against a window, or a raccoon on the roof. But then I glanced at the wall and froze. The photograph directly across from the bed, the one of a young girl in a white pinafore standing beside a wooden rocking horse, was different. In the original, her hands were clasped in front of her, eyes looking slightly off to the side. Now, her head was tilted toward the camera. Her fingers were splayed, as if reaching out. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes, looked again. No, she was definitely looking straight at me now. I got up, walked over, and touched the frame. It was cool, unremarkable. I studied the photo under the dim glow of my phone flashlight. There was no trick of the light, no double exposure. It was the same print, but the girl's posture, her gaze, it had changed. My stomach turned. "Okay," I whispered. "This is ridiculous." I checked the other photos. All seemed unchanged. I took a picture of the girl with my phone for comparison and went back to bed, leaving the light on. The next morning, Evelyn wasn't in the house. A note on the kitchen counter read, "Gone to Sisters. Back in 3 days. Help yourself to pantry." I told myself I'd imagined it. Sleep deprivation, stress. The mind plays tricks. But that evening, After writing for a few hours and eating a sad dinner of canned soup, I decided to document the photos, partly out of curiosity, partly to prove to myself I wasn't going crazy. I spent 2 hours photographing every frame in the room. There were 47 in total. I uploaded them to a folder labeled House Photos Before, backed them up to the cloud, and went to sleep. I dreamed of whispers, voices layered over each other, too quiet to understand, rising and falling like wind through eaves, a child laughing, a woman sobbing, and beneath it all, a single phrase repeated, "Don't look away." I woke up drenched in sweat. The digital clock read 3:17 a.m., and every single photograph on the walls had changed, not just a girl. The stern-faced man in the top hat now had his mouth open in a silent scream. The picnic group, once smiling, were all staring at the camera with hollow eyes. In the portrait of a wedding couple, the bride's veil had been torn, and dark stains spread across her chest like blood. I scrambled out of bed, hands shaking, and pulled up the photos I'd taken the night before. Side by side, the differences were undeniable. It wasn't a trick. It wasn't my imagination. The pictures had changed while I slept. I grabbed my phone, paced the room, trying to rationalize it. Maybe someone had swapped them, but the doors were locked. The windows hadn't been touched. And even if someone had broken in, how could they replicate 47 vintage photos with subtle alterations in a single night? No, this house was doing something. That's when I noticed the mirror above the dresser. In it, my reflection looked wrong. My eyes were darker, my hair was slightly longer, and behind me in the reflection of the wall, one of the photos showed me, standing in the room, wearing pajamas, back turned, staring at the bed. But I wasn't in that position. I spun around. The actual photo on the wall was still the wedding couple, but in the mirror it showed me. I backed away from the mirror so fast I tripped over the rug. I didn't sleep again that night. By morning, I was a wreck. I considered leaving, packing up and driving back to the city, even if it meant sleeping in my car. But where would I go? I had no money, no job, and part of me, a stupid, stubborn part, wanted to understand. So I stayed. I started researching the house. The town library was small but had archives. I learned that the home was built in 1889 by a man named Silas Harrow, a wealthy industrialist who made his fortune in timber. He lived there with his wife and 5 children. All 5 children died before the age of 12, one from diphtheria, one drowned in the creek behind the property, another fell from the turret window. The last 2 vanished during a winter storm in 1903 and were never found. Silas went mad with grief. Locals claimed he took photographs of the children every day, even after their deaths, setting their clothes in chairs and propping up dolls to fill the frame. After his wife hanged herself in the attic, Silas sealed every room except the nursery and lived there alone until his death in 1921. The house passed through distant relatives, but no one stayed long. People reported hearing children running through the halls at night, doors opening by themselves, and the photos, always the photos, changing. One woman claimed the faces in the pictures began to follow her. Another said she woke up one morning to find her own face in an old family portrait from 1897. She left that same day. I should have too, but I didn't. Instead, I became obsessed. I started sleeping with my phone recording a time-lapse video of the walls. I set up motion sensors, I even tried staying awake for 2 full nights, watching the photos like a hawk. Nothing happened while I was conscious, but the moment I closed my eyes, even for 10 minutes during a nap, the changes occurred. The girl in the pinafore now held a small dark object in her hand. A knife? A doll? Too blurry to tell. The wedding bride stains had spread. Now her entire torso was blackened, and new photos appeared. Not replacements. Additions. Framed pictures I didn't recognize showed up overnight, tucked between the originals. One showed a man hanging from the attic rafters, his face obscured by shadow. Another depicted a child's hand emerging from beneath a bed, fingers curled like claws. I began to dread sleep, but exhaustion always won, and each morning the horror deepened. One night I woke to the sound of breathing, not mine, soft, wet, right beside my ear. I didn't move, didn't open my eyes, pretended to still be asleep. The breathing grew louder, closer, then a cold hand brushed my cheek. I screamed and lashed out, but there was no one there. When I turned on the light, the photo of the picnic group had changed again. Now, in the center of the image, someone had been added, a figure in modern clothing, jeans, a gray t-shirt, tousled hair. Me, standing among them, eyes wide with terror, mouth open in a silent cry. I was in the photograph. I had never posed for it. I tore it off the wall and threw it across the room. It shattered against the baseboard. But the next morning, it was back, frame intact, glass unbroken, and my image was clearer now. I could see the sweat on my brow, the fear in my eyes. That's when I realized the house wasn't just changing the photos. It was recording me, absorbing me. Piece by piece, night by night, I was becoming part of its collection. I tried to leave 3 times. The first time, my car wouldn't start. The battery was dead, though it had been fine the day before. The second time, I walked out the front door at dawn, suitcase in hand, and found myself back on the porch 10 minutes later, disoriented, with no memory of turning around. The third time, I made it all the way to the edge of the woods. But the road, it kept curving back toward the house, like the land itself wouldn't let me go. Evelyn returned on the 4th day. She found me in the kitchen, hollow-eyed, clutching a mug of cold coffee. "You've seen them, haven't you?" she said, not unkindly. I nodded. She sighed and sat across from me. "My husband, he thought the photos were beautiful. He used to say they were alive with memory. Then one night, he walked into his study and never came out. When I found him, he was sitting in his chair, staring at the wall. His eyes, they were open but empty, like he'd been pulled out through them." She looked up at me, her gaze heavy. "The house doesn't want you to leave. It's choosing you." "Why?" I whispered. "Because you're alone, because you're afraid, because you notice it." She leaned forward. "It feeds on attention, on fear. The more you look, the more it takes." I asked her why she rented to me. She didn't answer, just stood and walked away. That night, I made a decision. I wouldn't fight it. I wouldn't run. I would watch. I laid in bed with my eyes wide open, staring at the photos, refusing to blink. Hours passed. My eyes burned. My mind screamed for rest, but I held on. At 2:33 a.m., the lights flickered. Not just in my room, in the whole house. A low hum filled the air, vibrating through the floorboards. Then slowly, every photograph on the walls began to turn. Not the images, the actual frames. They rotated on their hooks, one by one, until every single one faced the bed. Every eye, in every portrait, locked onto me. Even the ones with no faces, just shadows, silhouettes, empty chairs, felt like they were watching. And then, from the hallway, I heard footsteps, light, skipping steps, the kind a child would make. They stopped outside my door. The knob turned. I didn't move. The door creaked open. Nothing there. But in the mirror across the room, I saw her. The girl from the pinafore. She stood behind me close enough that I could feel her breath on my neck. In the mirror, she smiled. Her teeth were black. Her eyes were mine. I closed my eyes. Just for a second, just to make it stop. When I opened them, I was no longer in the bed. I was in the photograph. Standing among the picnic group, frozen in time, screaming as silently as the house sealed me in. And from the bed, my body sat up, empty-eyed, smiling, and began to take down another frame from the wall. There's a new photo now. It shows a man in a gray T-shirt sitting on a 4-poster bed, staring at the camera with wide, terrified eyes. He looks just like me, but I'm not him anymore. I'm the one watching, and if you ever rent a cheap room in an abandoned house, don't look at the pictures. Don't sleep. Because once you do, the house will remember you, and it never forgets. And this story ends here. The next one begins now. The woman in the photograph on the mantle changes position when no one is home. I inherited the house from my great-aunt Miriam, a woman I'd met exactly twice in my life. Once at my grandfather's funeral when I was 7, and again at her own wake, where she looked so peaceful in her casket I almost believed she was merely napping. The lawyer's letter arrived on a Tuesday, dry and formal, informing me that Miriam had left me her entire estate, a 3-story Victorian on Elm Street, all its contents, and a modest sum in a savings account that wouldn't cover 6 months of city rent, but felt like a fortune in this forgotten town. There were no conditions, no stipulations, just a simple bequest to her only living relative who might understand a quiet. I didn't understand a quiet then. I do now. The house was exactly as I remembered it from that single childhood visit, imposing, shadowed by ancient oaks, its gingerbread trim peeling like sunburnt skin. Inside, time had stopped sometime in the late 1980s. Floral wallpaper, avocado green appliances, furniture draped in yellowed sheets. Dust lay thick on every surface, undisturbed for years. It smelled of cedar, old paper, and something else. A faint, sweet scent like dried roses left too long in a vase. I spent the first week cleaning, airing out rooms, trying to make the place livable. On the 3rd day, I tackled the living room. As I pulled the sheet off the fireplace mantle, a photograph caught my eye. It stood in a heavy silver frame, slightly tarnished, facing the room as if waiting for company. The photo was black and white, faded at the edges, showing a woman seated in a high-backed chair beside a potted fern. She wore a dress from the 1940s, high collar, cinched waist, and her hair was pinned neatly back. Her expression was serene, almost stern, but her eyes held a depth that seemed to follow me as I moved around the room. At the bottom of the frame, etched into the silver, were 2 words, Eleanor Voss. I assumed she was a relative, perhaps Miriam's mother or aunt. I placed the photo back on the mantle, centered it carefully, and continued my work. That evening, as I sat on the couch eating takeout, I glanced at the mantle. The photo was still there, but something was off. The woman wasn't sitting in the same position. In the morning, her hands had been folded neatly in her lap, one atop the other. Now, her right hand rested on the arm of the chair, fingers slightly curled. I frowned, set my fork down, and walked over. I picked up the frame. Nothing seemed disturbed, no smudges, no loose backing. I checked the photo itself. It was glued firmly to the cardboard backing. No way it could have shifted on its own. I reset her hands to their original position, pressing the photo flat just to be sure. I even took a picture of it with my phone for reference. Then I went to bed, chalking it up to faulty memory or a trick of the light. The next morning, before leaving for the hardware store, I checked the photo. Her hands were back in her lap, perfectly folded. Relief washed over me. I must have imagined the change yesterday. Stress, exhaustion, the mind playing tricks in an unfamiliar space. But when I returned home that afternoon, the photo had changed again. This time, her head was tilted slightly to the left, as if listening to someone just out of frame. Her eyes, which had previously gazed directly forward, now seemed to look toward the hallway leading to the kitchen. My skin prickled. I hadn't touched the frame all day. I'd been gone for 4 hours. I took another photo. Then I placed a small piece of tape across the seam between the glass and the frame. Subtle tamper seal. If the photo moved again, the tape would tear. I left the house the next morning for a doctor's appointment, locking the front door behind me. When I returned 2 hours later, the tape was intact, undisturbed, but the woman in the photograph was standing, not seated, standing. One hand rested on the back of the empty chair, the other hung loosely at her side. Her posture was relaxed, expectant, as if she'd just risen to greet a visitor. The chair behind her was empty. The potted fern remained in the corner of the frame, unchanged. Only she had moved. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't touch the frame. I didn't go near the mantle. I backed out of the living room and spent the rest of the day in the kitchen, jumping at every creak of the old house. That night, I researched Eleanor Voss. The local historical society had sparse records, but I found a marriage certificate from 1942. Eleanor Marie Voss to Arthur Holloway. The same Arthur Holloway whose disappearance I'd read about in the newspaper archives during my research on the closet house. A chill ran down my spine. Was this all connected? Or was I seeing patterns where none existed? I found more. A death notice from 1951. Eleanor Voss. Holloway, age 32, passed peacefully after a long illness. No cause of death, no mention of children, and buried in a police report from 1949. A neighbor's complaint that Eleanor had been seen walking the halls at night, talking to herself, rearranging furniture for guests who never came. I returned to the living room with a flashlight and examined the photo under direct light. The emulsion on the surface showed no signs of double exposure or manipulation. It was a single, genuine photograph from the 1940s, and yet the woman inside it was moving. The next day, I set up a camera. I propped my phone on a stack of books on the coffee table, aimed directly at the mantle, and activated continuous recording with motion detection. I left the house for 3 hours, running errands, my heart pounding the entire time. When I returned, I checked the footage. For the first 2 hours and 47 minutes, nothing happened. The photo sat undisturbed on the mantle. Then, at 2:47 p.m., the image on the screen flickered. not the phone screen, but the photograph itself. For a single frame, less than a 30th of a second, the woman was standing. Then she was seated again. The motion detector hadn't triggered because the movement wasn't physical. It was within the photograph. The camera had captured it only because it was recording continuously. I watched the clip 10 times. There was no glitch, no artifact. The woman had moved inside the frame, and the camera had seen it. That evening, I sat in the living room with all the lights on, staring at the photograph. Eleanor sat primly in a chair, hands folded, gaze forward. She looked harmless, sad even. I spoke aloud, my voice trembling slightly. "What do you want?" Nothing happened. The house was silent. After an hour, I went to bed. The next morning, the photo had changed again. She was seated, but now she was looking directly at the camera, directly at me, as if she'd turned her head to meet my gaze the moment I entered the room, and in her lap, resting on her folded hands, was a single white gardenia. I hadn't brought any flowers into the house. There were no gardenias in the yard. They don't grow in this climate. I left the flower where it was. I didn't touch the photo. I began to understand. She wasn't threatening me. She was communicating, responding. The changes weren't random. They were reactions to my presence, my absence, my attention. When I was home, she stayed still, observant. When I left, she moved, testing her boundaries, exploring her prison, waiting for me to return. One rainy afternoon, I decided to test her. I sat on the couch with a notebook and pen. "If you can hear me," I said clearly, "move your right hand to the arm of the chair." I waited 30 seconds, a minute, nothing. I sighed, about to give up, when slowly, so slowly, I almost missed it, her right hand lifted from her lap and settled on the chair's armrest. Movement was smooth, deliberate, as if performed by a living woman adjusting her posture. My hand shook as I wrote in the notebook, "Who are you?" This time, the response was faster. She rose from the chair entirely, turned to face the front of the frame, and pointed to the name etched into silver. "Eleanor Voss." "But you're Eleanor Holloway," I said. "You married Arthur." She shook her head. Just once, a sharp, definitive motion. Then she pointed to the name again. Eleanor Voss. Unmarried, always Voss. I spent the next week in a strange, quiet dialogue with the woman in the photograph. I'd ask questions. She'd answer with gestures, shifts in posture, the occasional appearance of objects in the frame, a key, a letter, a child's hair ribbon. Through these fragments, her story emerged. She hadn't died of illness in 1951. She'd been murdered by Arthur. He'd discovered she was pregnant with another man's child, and in a fit of jealous rage, he'd pushed her down the stairs. To cover it up, he'd told everyone she was ill, kept her hidden in the attic until she died, then staged her peaceful passing. He'd buried her in the garden beneath the old oak tree, wrapped in her wedding dress, the one she'd refused to wear because she'd known even then that he was a monster. After her death, her spirit couldn't leave, not because she was bound to the house, but because she was bound to the lie. As long as the world believed she'd died peacefully, her truth remained buried. She needed someone to know, someone to witness, someone to say her name not as Eleanor Holloway, but as Eleanor Voss, the woman she was before he tried to erase her. And the photograph was her anchor, the only image of her that existed outside his narrative, the only proof she'd ever been real. The final piece came when I dug beneath the oak tree in the backyard. It took 2 days of careful digging, but I found it. Oh, small, rusted lockbox containing a diary, a wedding ring, not hers, and a birth certificate for a daughter named Clara, born in secret in 1948 and given up for adoption to protect her from Arthur's wrath. The night I brought the box into the house, I placed it on the coffee table in front of the mantel. Eleanor's photograph changed instantly. She was no longer in the chair. She stood in the center of the frame, her hands clasped over her heart, tears streaming down her face, tears that hadn't been there a moment before, the first time I'd seen her cry. I opened the diary and read her final entry aloud. If anyone finds this, know that I was happy once. Know that I loved my daughter more than life itself. Know that my name is Eleanor Voss, and I was murdered by the man who claimed to love me. Say my name. Let the truth be known. When I finished, the photograph began to fade, not quickly, but gradually, like ink dissolving in water. Eleanor's form grew translucent, then ghostly, then nearly invisible. But her smile remained, the first and only time I'd seen her smile, a smile of peace, of release. By morning, the photograph was blank, just an empty chair, a potted fern, and a blank space where a woman had once sat, waited, and finally been heard. I keep the frame on the mantel still. Sometimes, in the late afternoon light, I swear I see the faint outline of a woman standing beside it, her hand resting gently on the silver edge. And on the coffee table, I've placed a fresh white gardenia every Sunday, not because she asks for it, but because some truths deserve to be remembered, some names deserve to be spoken, and some ghosts don't need to haunt houses. They just need someone to listen long enough to set them free. The woman in the photograph on the mantel changes position when no one is home. But now, when I'm home, I talk to the empty frame anyway, because I know she's listening, and because silence is the only thing that ever truly imprisoned her. And that's where this story ends. Let's move on to the next one. I was chosen for a sleep experiment. No one told me I'd be the only subject left. The advertisement was unassuming, tucked between a plea for plasma donors and a gig for a part-time dog walker. It was printed in the bland sans-serif font of institutional efficiency. Volunteers needed for paid somnology study. Participants must be in good health, age 21-35, with no history of sleep disorders. Compensation, $15,000 for a 2-week commitment. $15,000. To a freelance graphic designer like me, neck deep in student loans and living off ramen that tasted of salty despair, that number wasn't just compensation. It was a lifeline. It was 2 months' rent, a down payment on a reliable car, a chance to breathe. All I had to do was sleep. It sounded like the easiest money I would ever make. My name is Leo, and my capacity for optimism has always been my most dangerous flaw. The intake process took place in a sterile downtown office building that smelled of lemon-scented cleaner and quiet desperation. I sat on a plastic chair, filling out a questionnaire that probed every corner of my life, from my childhood fears to my current caffeine intake. One by one, we were called back to meet the man in charge, Dr. Alastair Finch. He was a man who seemed to have been carved from a block of granite and then polished to a high sheen. He had a perfectly trimmed gray beard, sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through you, and a smile that was both reassuring and utterly devoid of warmth. "The purpose of Project Morpheus," he explained to me, his voice a smooth, confident baritone, "is to study the effect of a new neurostimulant, which we're calling somnolin. Our hypothesis is that it can dramatically enhance the restorative qualities of REM sleep, allowing the brain to achieve in 4 hours what it normally would in 8. Imagine the applications, Mr. Vance. Increased productivity, accelerated learning, even rapid trauma processing." He made it sound like we were on the cusp of curing the human condition itself. I nodded along, pretending to be fascinated by the science, but all I could see were dollar signs. There were 4 other subjects chosen alongside me. We were a motley crew, united by our shared need for a quick payday. There was Marcus, a former Marine, with a cynical smirk and a web of tattoos crawling up his neck. Chloe, a bubbly, perpetually cheerful art student with magenta-streaked hair. Ben, a quiet, socially awkward programmer who seemed to communicate better with his laptop than with people. And Zara, a high-strung grad student who jumped at every unexpected noise. The facility was located in the basement of the same office building, but it felt like a different world. A series of heavy soundproof doors led us into a self-contained habitat, a windowless bunker of stark white walls, soft gray carpet, and recessed lighting that mimicked a 24-hour cycle. The air was cool and tasted filtered, recycled. We were completely cut off from the outside world. No phones, no internet. Our home for the next 14 days. Each of us was assigned a small, comfortable room. It contained a single bed embedded with a latticework of sensors, a small desk, and a camera mounted in the upper corner of the ceiling, a dispassionate, unblinking eye. Dr. Finch assured us it was only for monitoring our sleep patterns and ensuring our safety. A pleasant communal area with a kitchenette and a small library of pre-approved books and board games served as our living room. It was all designed to be calming, a sterile, controlled womb. But as that final door hissed shut behind us, locking us in, I felt a tremor of unease. It didn't feel like a womb. It felt like a tomb. The first few days were almost comically benign. We'd sleep in our sensor-laden beds and IV line taped to our arms, delivering what Finch called a microdose of somnolin. During our waking hours, which were strictly regulated, we underwent a battery of tests, memory games, logic puzzles, reaction time assessments. We'd fill out detailed questionnaires about our dreams, our moods, our energy levels. And at first, it was incredible. I'd never felt so rested. I would wake up feeling a profound sense of clarity, as if my mind had been decluttered and polished overnight. My dreams were vivid, cinematic. I dreamt of soaring over mountain ranges, of revisiting a perfect, sun-drenched day from my childhood. The others reported similar experiences. Chloe was dreaming up entire galleries of fantastical paintings. Ben claimed to have solved a complex coding problem in his sleep. We felt like pioneers of the mind. The $15,000 felt like a steal. The change began on the 4th night. The pleasant Technicolor dreams began to bleed at the edges. I had a dream that I was wandering the sterile white corridors of the facility, but the layout was all wrong. Hallways stretched into impossible lengths, and doors opened into brick walls. I felt a gnawing sense of anxiety, a feeling of being watched. I woke up with a gasp, my heart pounding, a cold sweat slicking my skin. At breakfast, I noticed the shift in the others, too. Marcus was sullen and aggressive, snapping at Ben for chewing too loudly. Chloe usually a font of incessant cheer, was quiet, her eyes distant. She had a sketchbook open on the table, and on the page was a disturbing abstract drawing of a tall, stick-thin figure made of swirling, chaotic lines. "I keep seeing him," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "At the edge of my dreams. He just watches." That night, my dream picked up where the last one left off. I was back in the twisting, labyrinthine corridors. But this time, I wasn't alone. I saw him, the figure from Chloe's drawing. He was at the far end of a long hallway, a gaunt, impossibly tall man in what looked like an old-fashioned tattered doctor's coat. His face was a blur of shadow, but I could feel his gaze on me, cold and malevolent. I woke up not with a gasp, but with a choked, silent scream. The waking world was becoming just as strange. I started to experience micro-hallucinations, a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision, the sound of my name whispered from an empty room. The puzzles Dr. Finch gave us were becoming more difficult, almost nonsensical, designed to frustrate and disorient. The first to break was Zara. During a particularly grueling cognitive test, she suddenly threw her tablet against the wall. "It's a trick!" she shrieked, her eyes wide with terror. "The questions are changing when I'm not looking. He's changing them." Dr. Finch and his assistant, a young, nervous-looking woman named Anya, rushed in. Zara was hysterical, clawing at her own arms. They injected her with a sedative. She has a pre-existing anxiety condition she failed to disclose, Finch announced to the rest of us, his voice a mask of clinical concern. For her own safety, she is being withdrawn from the study. They carried her out. The heavy door hissed shut, and then there were four. The atmosphere in the communal room turned toxic. Ben became convinced the cameras were recording our thoughts. He started speaking in whispers, covering his mouth with his hand. Marcus paced the floor like a caged animal, his eyes darting back and forth, his cynicism curdling into raw paranoia. We were lab rats, and we were beginning to realize that the maze we were in was far more complex than we had imagined. The next night, the dose of somnolin was increased. That night, I didn't just dream of the gaunt man. I met him. I was in a nightmarish version of my childhood home. He was there, standing in the living room, his shadowy face turned towards me. He didn't speak, but a voice echoed in my head, a dry, rasping sound like dead leaves skittering across pavement. "You don't belong here," it said. "This place is mine." I woke up swinging, my fist connecting with the wall beside my bed. The pain was a grounding, welcome sensation. Ben was next to go. He'd barricaded himself in his room, refusing to come out. We could hear him through the door, muttering about firewalls and corrupted code, convinced that the Watcher was trying to hack into his brain. It took Finch and two large orderlies he seemed to produce from nowhere to force the door open and drag him out, sedated and silent. "An unfortunate psychotic break," Finch explained, his expression unreadable. "The somnolent can have an amplifying effect on latent mental instabilities." Now there were three. Fear was a constant metallic taste in my mouth. We were trapped with a man who was either a madman or a monster, and the line between the two was becoming increasingly blurry. Marcus, Chloe, and I huddled together in the communal room, a tribe of the terrified. Marcus was convinced the food was being drugged. Chloe wouldn't stop drawing the gaunt man, her sketchbook now a gallery of horrors. Pages and pages of the same stick-thin figure, his face always a void of shadow. "I saw a name," she whispered to me, her eyes wide and haunted. "In my dream last night. I was in Finch's office. There was a plaque on the wall, an old one. It said, 'In Memoriam, Dr. Elias Thorne, a pioneer who gave his life in the pursuit of knowledge.'" Marcus tried to make a break for it. He waited for one of the orderlies to bring in a food tray and tried to rush the door. He was strong, but they were ready for him. A taser crackled, and he went down, convulsing on the soft gray carpet. They dragged his unconscious body away. No explanation was given this time. We didn't need one. We knew the rules of this twisted game now. There was no escape. And then there were two. Chloe and I were the only ones left. We were ghosts haunting the sterile white halls of our prison. We tried to stay awake, taking turns watching over each other, but the exhaustion was a physical weight crushing us. And the IV drips were mandatory. Anya, the assistant, would come in, her face pale and strained, and check the lines. I could see the pity in her eyes, but also the fear. She was as much a prisoner as we were. "He's getting stronger," Chloe mumbled, her head lolling against my shoulder. We were huddled on the sofa, a single blanket wrapped around us. "Thorne, I think he died here, in this facility. I think the experiment. It's not what Finch told us." That was the last coherent thing she said to me. The next time I saw her, she was asleep in her bed. But it wasn't a normal sleep. Her eyes were open, staring blankly at the ceiling. She was breathing, but she was gone, a shell. Anya came in to check on her and let out a small, strangled cry. Finch was right behind her. He showed no emotion as he shone a penlight into Chloe's unblinking eyes. "A catatonic state," he said, his voice as calm as if he were describing the weather. "A potential, though rare, side effect. It was all outlined in the consent form you signed." He turned his cold, analytical gaze on me. "Which means, Mr. Vance, that you are the last one, the most resilient, the perfect subject. The experiment can now proceed to its final stage." I was alone, the sole survivor of Project Morpheus. The full, crushing weight of that realization sent a shock wave of pure terror through me. I lunged for the IV in my arm, intending to rip it out, but an alarm blared through the facility, a piercing, deafening shriek. Finch's voice boomed from a hidden speaker. "I wouldn't do that, Leo, don't you see? We are on the verge of a monumental breakthrough. This was never about enhancing sleep. It was about mapping the landscape within sleep. Somnolin doesn't create dreams. It dissolves the barrier. It opens a door." His words hit me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't a neurostimulant study. It was a cartography expedition into a haunted house. And we were the explorers sent in to map the darkness. The others weren't gone. They were lost. Their minds had been consumed by the landscape, by the dominant entity within it, the consciousness of Dr. Elias Thorne, a ghost in the machine. "He was the first," Finch's voice continued, a manic excitement creeping into his tone. "The original researcher. He tested his own formulas, pushed the boundaries too far. His consciousness became imprinted on the very fabric of this place, creating a stable, psychic echo, a new frontier. And you, Leo, you are my Vasco da Gama. You are going to step onto the shore." I knew with a sickening certainty that if I fell asleep again, I would not wake up. Thorne was waiting for me. Finch was waiting to observe. I was a tethered goat, and the tiger was circling. I spent the next cycle, I couldn't tell if it was day or night, pacing my room, splashing my face with cold water, pinching myself, anything to stay awake. But my body was betraying me. My eyelids were lead weights. The white walls of my room seemed to soften and waver at the edges. The barrier was already dissolving. I saw him, not in a dream, but in reality. He was standing in the doorway of my room, a shimmering heat-hazed distortion in the air. The gaunt, skeletal figure of Elias Thorne. The dream was bleeding into the world, and in that moment of absolute terror, a strange, cold clarity washed over me. I couldn't fight Finch in the real world. I couldn't fight Thorne in this one. But if the barrier was gone, then the connection worked both ways. I couldn't run, but maybe I could fight back. I lay down on the bed. I let my eyes close. I let the crushing exhaustion pull me under. But this time, I didn't fall. I dove. I went into the dreamscape with a purpose. I found myself not in the corridors, but in what looked like an old, archaic laboratory. Beakers bubbled with black liquid, wires snaked across the floor like dead vines. And in the center of it all was Thorne. He was more solid here, more real. His face was a pale, skeletal mask of pain and rage. "You cannot win," the voice echoed in my head, a psychic roar. "I am this world." "Then your world is about to end," I thought back, focusing all my will, all my identity, into a single point of resistance. Finch wanted a show. I would give him one. I stopped fighting Thorne's influence and instead focused on the environment. I remembered the happiest day of my life, a trip to the beach with my family when I was a kid. I flooded the dark, musty lab with the memory, the brilliant, blinding sunlight, the sound of crashing waves, the smell of salt and sunscreen. The dreamscape recoiled. Thorne shrieked, clutching his shadowy head as the light burned him. The dark lab flickered, the beakers and wires replaced by sand and seashells. "This is my mind," I projected, pouring all my anger, my fear, my desperate will to live into the thought. "My dream, and you are not welcome here." I focused on the machines, the sophisticated monitoring equipment I knew was attached to me in the real world. In the dream, I imagined them overloading. I visualized the main console in Finch's control room, the one I had only glimpsed on a schematic. I pictured the screens cracking, the wires sparking, the whole thing erupting in a shower of electrical fire. I poured every ounce of my focus into that single, destructive image. A sound jolted me, a real sound, an alarm, the smell of smoke. My eyes snapped open. I was back in my room. The facility's emergency lights were flashing, casting the white walls in a hellish red glow. The speaker on the wall was crackling with static. I had done it. I had created a feedback loop, my mental projection of destruction causing a real-world overload. My door hissed open. Anya stood there, her face white with terror and resolve. "Go!" she screamed. "The main breaker blew. The system locks are failing. Go now!" I didn't hesitate. I scrambled out of the room, my legs weak and trembling. The corridor was filled with acrid smoke. As I ran, I glanced through the reinforced window into the control room. It was chaos. Sparks rained down from a burned-out console, and in the middle of it all stood Dr. Finch. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't trying to put out the fire. He was staring at his monitors, at the chaotic spiking lines of my EEG, and he was smiling, an ecstatic, triumphant smile. I didn't look back again. I ran through the labyrinth of corridors, following Anya's frantic gestures until we reached the final door. She swiped a card, and it opened onto a grimy service staircase. The air that hit me was stale and damp, but it was real air. It was the air of the world. I burst out of a nondescript metal door into a back alley. The gray early morning light was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I was free. That was 6 months ago. I have the money. It was wired to my account the day I was admitted, as promised. But I lost everything else. I live in a different city under a different name. And I don't sleep. Not really. I drift in and out of a state of hallucinatory exhaustion, never letting myself go completely under. I'm terrified of what's waiting for me on the other side of that door. The experiment was a success. I know it was. Because sometimes when the light is dim and I'm looking at my reflection in a darkened window, the face that looks back isn't my own. For just a fraction of a second, I see a tall, gaunt man with a pale, skeletal face and eyes that burn with a cold, ancient hunger. Finch opened a door, and I was the one who walked through. But I'm beginning to understand the terrifying truth. I didn't come back alone. That brings this story to a close. Let's carry on to the next one. The old hotel, where every guest checks in but never checks out. The sign hung crooked over the 2-lane highway, its neon flickering in the rain like a dying pulse. The Granville vacancy, not vacancies, singular vacancy, as if only one room waited, patient, expectant, for the right traveler to stumble in out of the storm. My car coughed its last breath a mile back. Steam hissed from the hood like a warning exhalation. I've been driving for 14 hours straight, chasing a job interview in Pittsburgh that had evaporated by voicemail 3 towns ago. My phone was dead. My wallet held $20 and a half-eaten protein bar, and the rain, cold, relentless April rain, was turning the shoulder into a slick of mud and gravel. I walked. The Granville loomed out of the downpour like a forgotten monument. 5 stories of red brick darkened by decades of soot and neglect. Its once grand facade sagging at the cornices, windows boarded or broken, the porte cochere collapsed in on itself like a fallen ribcage. A wrought iron gate, rust-eaten and twisted, hung open just enough to admit a single person. The lobby doors were unlocked. Inside, the air was thick, not dusty, not stale, but preserved, like stepping into a sealed jar. The scent was old carpet beeswax, and underneath it all, the faint, sweet mold reek of damp plaster and something else. Something floral, cloying, like lilacs left too long in stagnant water. A chandelier hung overhead, crusted with cobwebs, 3 of its bulbs still lit, dim yellow, casting long, trembling shadows across the check-in desk. Behind it sat a man. He hadn't moved when I entered, hadn't looked up. He was ancient, 80s, maybe older, with skin like crumpled rice paper stretched over sharp bone. His hair was silver white, thin as cobweb, combed over a liver-spotted scalp. He wore a faded maroon vest, brass buttons tarnished green, over a white shirt with a frayed collar. His hands rested on the ledger. Before him, long fingers, knuckles swollen with arthritis, nails yellowed and ridged. "Room," I said, my voice rough from disuse and cold. He lifted his head slowly. His eyes were pale blue, almost colorless, like ice over deep water. They didn't blink, not once. "Room 317, he said. His voice was dry, whisper-thin, as if spoken through layers of gauze. "Cash only, $40, one night." I handed him 2 20s. He didn't count them, just slid them into a drawer without looking. He tore a key from a brass ring, old, heavy, stamped 3017, and pushed it across the desk. The key was cold, unnaturally so, like it had been resting on ice. "No checkout time," he said, still not blinking. "The room retains its guest until departure is appropriate." I frowned. What does that mean? A flicker in those pale eyes. Not amusement, not warning. Recognition. "Elevator's out," he said, ignoring my question. "Stairs are to your left. Third. Floor. End of the hall." I turned. "Mr. Hale," he added. I stopped. "Yeah?" "My name is Mr. Hale. Should you need assistance?" I nodded, already backing away. The staircase was narrow, carpeted in a once rich burgundy now faded to the color of dried blood. Each step groaned, not the usual creak of old wood, but a low, wet squelch, like stepping on something buried just beneath the surface. The hallway on the third floor stretched into dimness. Wall sconces flickered erratically, casting stuttering light over peeling floral wallpaper. The pattern was roses, but the longer I looked, the more the petals seemed to twist, to curl inward like clenched fists. Some blooms looked disturbingly like eyes. Room 317 was at the very end. The door was solid oak, dark with age. No peephole, no number plate, just a brass keyhole, tarnished black around the edges. I inserted the key. It turned with a sound like a bone snapping. The door opened inward. The room was small, Spartan. A narrow bed with an iron frame, a nightstand with a ceramic lamp, shade-stained yellow, a straight-backed chair, and a small dresser with a mirror clouded at the edges. The window looked out over the hotel's rear courtyard, a tangle of dead hedges and a dry stone fountain choked with weeds. It was clean, too clean, no dust, no fingerprints on the lamp. The sheets were crisp, hospital white, tucked with military precision. I dropped my duffel on the chair. Exhaustion hit me like a physical weight. I sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress didn't give. It was hard, unyielding, like lying on a slab. I lay back, stared at the ceiling. Water stains bloomed there, dark branching patterns like veins or roots or neural pathways. One large stain spread from the center outward, forming a rough asymmetrical circle. At its heart, the plaster was slightly raised, not bulging, just taut, like skin stretched over something pressing up from above. I closed my eyes. Sleep came fast and deep. I woke to the sound of breathing, not mine, slow, wet, rhythmic, right beside the bed. I froze, didn't move a muscle. The breathing continued. Inhale, a long rasping draw like air pulled through wet gravel. Exhale, a low bubbling sigh. I opened my eyes. The room was dark. The streetlight outside cast a weak orange rectangle on the far wall. Next to the bed, where the nightstand stood, a shape waited, taller than a man, thin. Its head brushed the ceiling. It had no features, no face, just a smooth, pale oval where a face should be. But as I watched, the surface rippled. A mouth formed, thin, lipless, opening slowly. No teeth, just darkness inside. It leaned down. Closer, the smell hit me. Lilacs, rotting lilacs, and beneath it, the coppery tang of old blood. Its breath washed over my face, cold, damp, smelling of earth and stagnant water. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, paralyzed, not by fear, though terror screamed in my skull, but by something deeper, a command, a pressure behind my eyes. Do not resist, do not witness, this is not for you. The mouth opened wider, a sound emerged, not a voice, but a chorus of whispers, layered, overlapping, all speaking at once, all saying the same thing. Stay. Then it was gone. I sat bolt upright, gasping. Sweat soaked my shirt. The room was empty. Sunlight, weak gray, filtered through the grimy window. Morning. I stumbled to the bathroom down the hall. The mirror above the sink was fogged. Not with steam. I hadn't run the water, but with a fine, oily condensation. I wiped it with my sleeve. My reflection stared back, pale, exhausted, and behind my left shoulder, just at the edge of the frame, another face, not mine, a woman, mid-30s, dark hair plastered to her temples, eyes wide, pupils blown black with terror. Her mouth was open in a silent scream. I whirled. The bathroom was empty. I looked back at the mirror. Just me. But on the fogged glass where her face had been, words were forming, slowly, as if written by an invisible fingertip. He knows you saw me. I ran back to 317, packed my duffel in 30 seconds. I needed to leave, now. I yanked open the door. The hallway stretched before me, but it was longer, much longer. The far end, the stairs, were gone, replaced by more hallway, identical, repeating into dimness. Doors lined both sides, all closed, all numbered, but the numbers made no sense. 209, 412, 103, 307, 307, 307. 3 doors down, one stood slightly ajar. Room 318. From within, a low, rhythmic thumping, like a fist, pounding weakly against wood. Thump, thump, thump. I backed into my room, slammed the door, locked it, leaned against it, heart hammering. It's the stress, I told myself. Sleep deprivation, carbon monoxide, old furnace. I needed proof. I pulled out my phone. Dead. Still. But the hotel's landline, ancient rotary on the nightstand, sat silent. I picked up the receiver, a dial tone, faint, warbling. I dialed 911. It rang, once, twice. Then a voice answered, not a dispatcher, a man, young, terrified. Hello? Hello, is someone there? Please, please. Tell them I'm in 209. Tell them I never checked out. He won't let me. I tried the window, but the glass, it moved. It held me. The line went dead. I dropped the receiver. It dangled, swaying, bumping against the nightstand. Click. The lamp turned on by itself. The bulb glowed, not yellow, but a sickly, pulsing green. In the mirror atop the dresser, my reflection wasn't alone. The woman stood behind me now, closer. Her hand rested on my shoulder. Her fingers were ice. I spun. Nothing but the mirror. The reflection lingered for a second longer, her face contorted in silent agony before fading. On the mirror's surface, new words appeared, dripping, like condensation. Don't trust the stairs. I had to get out. I threw open the door again. The hallway was back to normal length. The stairs waited at the end. I ran down one flight. The wallpaper here was different, striped, not floral. But the stripes weren't vertical. They curved, subtly, like the inside of a throat. Second floor, a door stood open, room 209. I slowed, peered in, empty, bed stripped, dresser bare. But the carpet, dark stains radiated from the center of the room in perfect concentric circles, like something had bled outward. A lot. And on the wall above the bed, scrawled in what looked like charcoal or dried blood, 3 words. I still wait. I fled down to the first floor. The lobby was empty. Mr. Hale was gone. The ledger lay open on the desk. I approached. The page was filled, not with names, but with dates. April 3rd, 1952, October 17th, 1968, March 9th, 1977, November 2nd, 1984, July 14th, 1991, August 31st, 2003, September 5, 2010, April 12th, today's date, At the bottom of the page, in fresh, wet ink, Jacob Miller, room 3F in Atlanta Tenant. My name. I hadn't given it to him. I backed away, toward the front doors. They were locked. Not just locked, sealed. The wood around the frame was swollen, dark, glistening, faintly, like wet meat. I pounded on the glass. "Hey, anyone, let me out!" My reflection stared back, and behind me, in the lobby's shadows, figures stood. A man in a business suit, tie askew, one eye swollen shut. A teenage boy clutching a basketball, his neck bent at an impossible angle. The woman from the mirror, her mouth still open in that silent scream. They didn't move, just watched. Waiting. I turned. Mr. Hale stood at the foot of the stairs. He held a brass key ring. Every key on it was identical. Everyone stamped 301 Fremont Hall. "Departure is not yet appropriate," he whispered. I ran for the service door, marked employees only, near the front desk. It opened easily. A narrow corridor, dark, smelling of mildew and bleach. At the end, a door with a crash bar. I slammed my shoulder into it. It gave. Cold air hit my face. I stumbled out into the hotel's courtyard. The dead hedges, the dry fountain, but the gate to the street, gone, replaced by more hedges, taller, thicker, twisted into an impenetrable wall. The fountain wasn't dry. Water, thick, dark, smelling of iron, bubbled sluggishly in its basin, and floating in it, a key, brass, stamped 381. I didn't want it, but my hand reached out, pulled it from the water. It was warm, pulsing, like a heart. I looked up. Every window on the hotel's rear facade was open. Everyone held a face, watching me, waiting. The woman in 3117's window mouthed two words. "Come home." I turned back to the service door. It was gone. Only brick wall now, smooth, seamless, no handle, no seam. Just the words, etched into the mortar in that same looping script, "You are already in." Panic, raw and primal, tore through me. I ran to the nearest ground floor window, room 101, peered in. Empty, bed made, but the closet door stood open. Inside, shoes, dozens of them, men's, women's, children's, all sizes, all caked in dried mud, and beside them, suitcases, packed, zipped, labels visible, E, Voss, D, Alden, M, Henderson, J, Miller, my name. I stumbled back. The courtyard was shrinking, the hedges pressed inward, branches clicking like insect legs. The fountain's water rose, bubbling higher, darker, filling with shapes. Hands. Pale, bloated hands, reaching up, grasping. I ran for the back of the property, where the old garage should be. Found it. The door hung open. Inside, not cars, beds, dozens of narrow cots arranged in rows, all occupied. People lay on them, men, women, young, old, eyes open, staring at the ceiling, not breathing, not moving, but their chests rose and fell, slowly, rhythmically. Thump, thump, thump. Not hearts. The floor beneath each cot pulsed, like something massive breathed below the foundation. I backed out. Rain had stopped. The sky was bruised purple. Night falling fast. I had one idea left. The roof. Fire escape. I found the rusted iron stairs bolted to the side of the building, climbed, third floor. My window, 317, glowed with that sickly green light. I didn't look. Fourth floor, windows dark. Fifth floor. The access door to the roof hung ajar. I pushed it open. The roof was flat, gravel strewn. Wind whipped my hair. The town lights glittered in the distance. Freedom, maybe 2 miles away. I could run. Jump to the next building? The drop was 20 feet. Risky, but better than a sound behind me. I turned. Mr. Hale stood at the roof access. He wasn't alone. The woman, Eleanor, stood beside him. Her skin was gray. Her eyes were open, but white, clouded. She held a suitcase. It was mine. "Departure requires completion," Mr. Hale said, his voice carrying unnaturally in the wind. "Completion of what?" I screamed. Eleanor stepped forward. She opened the suitcase. Not my clothes inside, just paper, hundreds of sheets, all filled with the same phrase, written in frantic overlapping hands. "I want to leave." And beneath them, blank pages, waiting. She held out a pen. It was bone, sharp at one end. "Sign," she whispered, her voice a chorus of dry leaves scraping stone. "Sign, and you may go." My hand moved, not by choice, drawn by the pen, by the blank page, by the need, sudden, overwhelming, to put my name to something, to confirm my presence, to be acknowledged. I took the pen, touched it to the paper. The moment the point met the page, the roof shuddered. A deep, groaning vibration rose through the gravel. The hotel inhaled. Windows flared green. Every door on every floor slammed open at once. And from within, the sound, not scratching, not whispering, singing. A low, wordless drone, hundreds of voices harmonizing in a key that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. The pen bit into my finger, blood welled, dripped onto the page. The blood didn't soak in. It moved, crawled across the paper, formed letters, not my name. "Welcome home." The pen twisted in my grip, wrenched my hand down, forced my fingers toward my own eye. I fought, muscles screaming, but the hotel song filled my skull, drowning thought, drowning will. Stay, stay, stay. The pen's point touched my eyelid, cold, sharp. I heard the membrane tear, felt the wet slide inward, not pain. Relief, a release of pressure, a door opening. Inside my head, light, not white, green, pulsing, and behind the light, them, the guests, not trapped, integrated. Their faces swam in the green glow. Eleanor, the businessman, the boy, dozens more, smiling now, peaceful, waiting for me to join the chorus. The pen withdrew. My vision in that eye was gone, replaced by the green light. But with the other, I saw the roof. Mr. Hale and Eleanor were gone. The access door stood open. Wind howled. I walked to the edge, looked down. The courtyard was full now. Hundreds of figures stood shoulder to shoulder, facing the hotel, all looking up, all staring at me, all smiling. The green light in my ruined eye pulsed brighter, stronger, sinking with the thumping in the floor, sinking with the song. My mouth opened without my consent, and I began to sing. The same note, the same wordless drone. Down below, the crowd smile widened. They knew it was done. I wasn't leaving. I was checking in permanently. The wind died. The town lights flickered out. Only the hotel remained, glowing green from every window, every crack, every seam. A beacon, a lighthouse for the lost, for the desperate, for the ones who just need a place to rest. I turned from the edge, walked back to the access door, descended the stairs. The hallway on the third floor was clean, bright, fresh paint, floral wallpaper, roses, whole and perfect. Room 317's door stood open. The bed was made. The suitcase sat on the chair, zipped, waiting. The key rested on the nightstand. I picked it up. Cold, familiar. I slipped it into my pocket, walked to the window, looked out. The courtyard was empty. The gate stood open. A car idled at the curb, a beat-up sedan, steam rising from its hood. A young man stepped out, shoulders slumped, face pale with exhaustion. He looked up, right at my window. Our eyes met. I raised my hand, not in warning, in welcome. I smiled and mouthed the words Mr. Hale had taught me. Vacancy. He hesitated, then walked toward the gate, toward the door, toward me. I turned from the window. The green light in my eye pulsed warmly. The song hummed in my chest. The room waited, patient, expectant, ready for its next guest. I sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress gave slightly, just enough. I closed my good eye, listened to the breathing start beside me, slow, wet, rhythmic. "Stay," it whispered, and this time I whispered back, "Yes."